Happy Friday and happy Valentine's Day to everybody. This is Rabble, Rants. It is a Blueprints of Disruption production. You're talking to Jessa McLean. I'm your host today alongside with Joe. And today we have Sean McGilvery joining us. If you're a listener of our podcast, you'll know Sean, but I'll let him introduce himself in just a second. What are we going to talk about today? As usual, we unpack the headlines from around Turtle Island mostly, and we unpack them from an anti-capitalist perspective, from a shit disturber perspective. And we also share stories of resistance to these things and much more. That's part of our second half of the show. And yeah, so today we have a lot on the agenda, but maybe not as loaded as last week. Joe's going to talk about, or he's going to open up the discussion on Trump's faith police, but we're also going to pull that back to CanCon as well. Keep an eye on Pierre Poilievre and what that means. Yeah. And fentanyl is on the lips of all of our politicians. Well, not literally, but they are all talking about it and not in a very good way. So we're going to unpack what they have to say as well as maybe what they should be saying. And that just kind of also brings up a lot of discussions on prison. So we're going to talk a little bit of abolitionist talk. So buckle up, people. That's what kind of show this is.
Absolutely. But first, I'd like to send out excuse me about that. But first, I'd like to send out a message to all our viewers. Actually, it was an image that was sent over to me, and I thought I'd want to share with everybody else as well as just send a happy Valentine's Day with our own personal happy Valentine's Day message to all of you.
That is so sweet.
Isn't it?
How does Luigi come up in every episode? I don't know. I did screenshot his address at a New York prison, though, if anybody would like to send a letter.
Absolutely. It's I mean, the common message when it comes to Luigi is they've tried to vilify him like, oh my God, he's an absolute terrorist. He's he killed somebody in the streets. It's a CEO. How dare we have this savagery? And just the absolute response from the community, regardless of what political sphere you're on, was always the no, we're okay with it. We don't feel threatened by him. He's not a danger to us because we're not an absolute rotten person from a rotten organization that's profiting off of people suffering.
Yeah,
Fun that is.
They're not going to find they're not going to find an audience with me on that one. What else we're going to talk about before we get Sean to introduce himself, though? Let's just tease people a little bit. Trump just keeps coming up. We are supposed to be Canadian content. I mean, it's not a rule or anything, but he's also obviously talking about Gaza, and we talk about Gaza. So we're also going to give you updates on the West Bank. And the Toronto District School Board really stepped in it yesterday, and that opens up a larger discussion that actually ties in with our most recent episode on Blueprints of Disruption, which was Process of Punishment. But it's talking about the implementation of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism in courts and in the instance that we're going to talk about today in our schools, in the school systems. So much wider implications beyond just the Toronto District School Board. Right, so that'll open up a discussion. But Sean, welcome to Rabble Rants. We love having new guests on, adds a different perspective. Just want to update the audience, let them know who you are and where they can find you when you're.
So I'm Sean McGilvery. I'm from Nova Scotia. I guess Cole Harbour, which is sort of an exurb of Halifax. I am, like Jessa, a disaffected previous New Democrat. Who's left the party and now has all kinds of things to say to and about the party. I am also pretty active in the organizing scene here in Kujipuktuk about Palestine. Like, I'm the audio technician for the weekly rallies that have been happening here since October of last year, and which are still happening, and we have one happening on Saturday.
Awesome. Thanks, John. We should drop the episode we did last week because who was on Bothered Boy just kept name dropping one guest after another, and you were one of them. And I'm like, oh, by the way, if you want to hear it was, you know, the story of you leaving the NDP. Somehow that also comes up in every episode. Not you particularly, but the disgruntled nature of our experience in the NDP. And so, yeah, Sean was on to talk about, we called it being pragmatic in the NDP, but it did center around, you know, the admonishment of a candidate for being pro-Palestine, or at least the abandonment of a candidate for being pro-Palestine, and, you know, just folding to the Israeli lobby. This is resonating with lots of people. They're like, hey, you could have brought Sean on, you could have brought so many people on to share like their ire with that, but it was a uniquely kind of inside perspective. But yeah, Joe, we put this at the top just because Trump is just fast and furious, and we think a lot of this stuff we can avoid, but I think it's a cautionary tale indeed. You want to take us through him mixing church and state? I like, there's a lot of Trump to unpack, but let's focus on one thing at a time.
There is a lot, so I'm just gonna, as I'm a terrible person here, not having this quite prepared, but I will in a second here. There we go. As I share that across, because I'm visual that way. Which one do I want first?
Well, I saw the photo. I'll just fill some space. I saw that photo online of Trump at the desk, and he did this in his last term too, where everyone's praying on him, and like everyone's kind of touching part of him and touching each other, and they're very stoic, and that just creeps me out seeing that. I mean, there's legislation and things that have real life implications to go on with it, but I think that's just like a red flag when you start to see that invocation of religion over and over and over again. When he wouldn't even put his hand on the Bible, though.
Yeah. No. He's, again, I think most people just that understand, or at least view Trump without viewing him as some sort of almost deity, the way this cult does. View that Trump is just an opportunist. Yeah, Christianity, yeah, Jeebus, and then whatever, just give me my money. I'm good. Give me followers and votes, that's great. I'm okay with that.
Bible's made in China.
Exactly. So, now, this is less to do, remember, when it comes to Trump, this is less to do with passing legislation through the House, and more about executive orders. Right now, his first 3 weeks has just been hammering the executive orders, including this, as well as everything else he's been working through. There is
Plastic
legislation
straws.
that's going that's just as horrible that we haven't really had a chance to discuss, because again, we're trying to focus more on Canada, and he's doing so much. But this one here is very concerning, because this is also right out of the playbook, out from when you go back to World War II. As the famous quote goes, the horrors of World War II did not start with gas chambers. They started with much more minor things, and this is one where it's not to say this is not a major thing. This is a major thing, but it's not. We're not throwing the people in the prison yet, unless we're talking about Guantanamo. So this here is just. This is starting to keep the population in fear, where now you're, unless you're truly Christian, following blindly whatever the Christian rhetoric from a very, very zealot person, they're going to, they're going to be judged, and who knows what this office is going to be doing. So the eradication of the Christian.
So, just so people can understand, Joe is sharing something from the whitehouse.gov. Like, this is
Correct.
not an article. This is a statement from the White House on, because I clicked on the other one that you have ready, is the establishment of the White House Faith Office. That's a spoiler alert, sorry, but, that language that they're using, the elimination of anti-Christian bias, like, holy shit.
This is coming straight out of the United States government, which is horrifying, since they were always the champion, or at least for the longest time, the champions, at least at the point of the forefathers. Once it got to the 50s, it got a little weird, saying that has to be a separation of church and state. That was their fundamental. It's, the people rule, not the church. That's why they got rid of the king. So for them to suddenly turn around and like, no, we're not going to turn around. and just say, no, the church now needs to be protected from anti-Christian because the church is under attack from everybody, everywhere, even though the church is the majority of the country to begin with.
Has real male rights movement vibes.
Oh, it does.
Where it's like for white people too, like any kind of sniff that their supremacy is threatened, it's oppression, right? Like they just have never felt it in that way. Well, like economically, yes, we all do, but it's like, oh, this is just real Israeli like too, victims, right? Playing the victims as you are the ultra aggressors.
Well, yeah, and it really plays into the way that evangelical Christians in the States are brought up with a narrative of persecution. They are brought up with a narrative that they're going to be like, they're all like having these bizarre, like quasi fantasies about being oppressed for their faith. And so it definitely, that's one of the things that's notable about the language that's used in this, is that it's clearly the product of the influence of actors in the evangelical church. Like, this isn't something that, like, it's not merely like, this is Donald Trump sitting at his desk trying to sort of like write a love letter to the evangelicals. Like, this is their language. It mirrors, you know, with all the legal-ish, constitution-y language that's in there. This is definitely lines up with the way that Christians, you know, in Christian media, you know, sorts of things, propagate this sort of false notion that they're oppressed, and that there's all kinds of like scriptural justification they'll dig up for this sort of thing too. Like, oh, they're gonna do this, they're gonna say horrible and do horrible things to Christians, and all these sorts of things. All kinds, you know, persecution and suffering is a huge theme in contemporary Christianity. So yeah, this definitely aligns with a lot of that in terms of the language.
Absolutely. And now, you know, with like the very next day, they now establish a faith office in the White House. Like,
is this not against their constitution? Like, what happened to the separation? Like, is this not a violation of that? Or, you know, I guess we'll have to challenge that down the road. Folks will do that, but.
So this goes into, again, an even much deeper problem too, because they're right now doing executive orders. Yeah. So hang on a second. It's not just the Christians, by the way. I want to highlight this particular line here.
Yeah. There's AIPAC.
Yep. Right there. So for those looking at this, if you see that, you know, they're combating anti-Semitic,
they don't even try to hide the racism.
Yeah. So anti-Semitic, remember, this is a surface level messaging, and for those who understand what we're already talking about, no explanation needed. For the rest, anti-Semitic, absolutely, don't get us wrong. There's no space for anti-Semitism. But right now, with things as we were discussing a little earlier on with IHRA, a lot of groups are trying to tie criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic, even though it is a criticism of a nation's policies, not of a person's faith overall. So, a massive difference. But again, they don't care. They are trying to conflate them intentionally.
Especially given that there's a lot more Islamophobic violence in the States than there is anti-Semitic or anti-Christian violence, presuming that's even a thing. So yeah, notable when you make the comment about like their racism is showing. Yeah, they picked, you know, predominantly white, because when they're talking about Christians, they're not talking about black churches. They're talking about white evangelical mega churches with a Starbucks in the lobby.
Yes. It's always awesome that there's a Starbucks in the lobby. The other part of this, I just need to find this particular thing, which is the person who's been put in charge of this thing is a lady by the name of Paula, and I'm missing her last name. Where I can't find her name here. She has a list of just absolutely horrible things in the past, and it's she's a radical Christian, which obviously if you're going to be doing this thing with Trump, it's going to be part of the requirement. And she's just going to make this thing worse. Like, she's going to absolutely ramp it up. She's going to, she was already known for having said a crap load of conspiracies, and we know these guys are going to be taking these crazy conspiracies and trying to turn them into some sort of policy. I mean, we already got the example. They tried to say that, you know, our borders have got fentanyl going into the U.S., which it doesn't. But it doesn't matter. It's enough for them to just put that out and people just buy it. They're going to do this thing too, and they're going to try to keep the population in check with this. Now,
yeah, even if they're not like running together with this, like in cahoots, the Canadian right is just, they're watching it, they're reading it as just as much as we are, and if it's people are lapping it up, if it's gaining any traction whatsoever, we're going to see it replicated, and we already have, right? Yeah. We already have.
So, well, it reminds me of, Sam Oosterhoff is the first thing that comes to mind is the
MP. Sam, you're not from Ontario.
I know.
He's
I know
made
of
it all
him.
the way over there, has he?
Well, yeah. I mean, he's a kook, and additionally, electing a 19-year-old to the Ontario legislature is no small feat. And I guess it's a smaller feat in Niagara, apparently, because Niagara seems to just be the epicenter of crazy in Ontario. I think that's also where Randy, the overalls guy, what's his name? Randy. What's his name now? He was an MPP previously, and he got chucked.
Hillier.
Yeah. So he's from the Niagara region too, isn't he?
Yeah.
So
no, I thought he was a Toronto area MP. Anyway.
No, Randy Hillier. Let me find out here. We'll tell you guys in one moment.
We don't have to worry about him too much.
Yeah, true. But it's interesting. In the Canadian perspective, like, what is the actual political heft of religion in our country? So our country, of course, is much more secular statistically than the United States. For example, in the 2021 census, so it's basically the Yukon and BC are now majority nuns. So basically a majority of people in either of those provinces/territories are of no specific religious faith. Here in Nova Scotia, it's about 37.5% of the population. So I guess one of the big differences, I guess, between Canada and the States is the power dynamic. Is like, does the evangelical church here have that same kind of pull? And I think one of the more notable things is that, and I've seen it alluded to elsewhere, is that I think in Canada religion is a more personal affair than it is in the States for a lot of folks. It's not like I didn't know, you discover by accident that you have friends that go to church. Like, you don't know who of your friends might attend church. Like, I thought I had no friends who attended church until I joined the NDP. And because the leader when I joined was a United Church minister previously, I think he brought a lot of folks in from like the admittedly probably least harmful or nearly least harmful side of the Christian movement, I guess, in Canada. But yeah, we do know, for example, that organizations like the Campaign for Life Coalition have been inserting themselves into Conservative Party EDAs and trying to affect candidate search and candidate selection, and they've been sort of approving or denying various candidates. So there is a little bit of a presence there. But I was actually sent to do oppo by the NSNDP at the March for Life this past fall here in Halifax, and it was like 7 senior citizens like sadly trudging down the street with their little signs.
Well, that might be in Halifax. It's a little more robust in other areas, unfortunately. Yeah, but I think it's not even so much. It ceases being totally a religious thing, because what they do is they tie it in with all those moral panic arguments that whether or not you're evangelical or it's just like it ties in with the scapegoating, right? The drag time, story time, and the vaccines and the freedom to refuse it became a freedom of religion argument. And it's just, you'll have people that resonate with that regardless if they would identify as being ultra religious or even semi-religious. And I think people like to dismiss that, we don't have such a strong tie to religion. Our politicians wouldn't dare. But this article here by the Tyee, and there's been others. I think Joe popped another great one up there, but I just went with this one because they talk how he's gone even further than Harper dared, and Harper was an evangelical Christian himself. He was part of these churches, and he still didn't even really publicly campaign with them. But for the last year, Poilievre has been really stepping this up, and then you pair that with the fact that he's also been hobnobbing with the far right. So, Joe, I'm sure you've been keeping an eye on these ties a little bit more closely than I have, because
I
You know,
I have, and I want to rewind a
not to.
little bit. In regards to conversation, in regards to as Sean was discussing CLC, and B in time itself. And I'm so it's important to look at this in regards to Pierre and the churches, but I'm going to bring back to something else that people may have seen and have forgotten over time. Uh, and it's going to be this guy right here. This is Liberty Coalition of Canada. Like CLC, these guys have been working busy behind the scenes in regards to organizing. This originally started with a during
They're
the
an ugly bunch.
oh yeah, yeah. Nothing
I say that?
says yeah. These these guys are all have opinions on abortion, every one of them. But these guys organized during the COVID. About 200 churches got together and tried to campaign again, and they've been organizing together. Some of the great work that they've done is their defense fund, including one particular one that I watched quite a bit, which was Josh Alexander versus RCCDSB. Sean's reaction lets me know, no, he knows who he is.
Yeah, blank stare over here, Joe. I need details.
Sean, okay, so
high level details.
It's that high school kid who claimed that he got kicked out of high school for being Catholic. He got kicked out of high school for starting a hate rally at his school.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's one of those red hat dorks.
Yeah. It was this particular individual. He got kicked out for a trans student.
What flag is behind him?
Yes, both the American and the Canadian
flags
flag.
Plural.
Oh, okay, I get it. Okay,
that's how you tell the real Canadian patriots.
Kind of had Confederate.
They have American flags.
He's actually American. Him and his brother are American. They came up to Canada with his father. Yep. I've seen quite a few events, including Daniel Smith, because he went to go see Daniel Smith, of course. And yeah, so these guys, so this particular group funded his entire legal defense. They brought in the lawyer, they brought in everything else, and they were using him for quite a while to continue this Christian narrative. Him and his brother and a few of the other kids, and they were prominent at drag time story time. You'd see them there often. They'd come in with their hats and waving their flags. And once in a while they might sing, but then they'd be. I remember one time he snuck into a place and he's like, all the drag. It was a drag story time at the NEC. He's like, yeah, they were all in there and they're all naked. It was with kids all around. It was and
people
everybody
eat
was there
that
like,
stuff
no.
up too, right? They believe it.
He went in there and intentionally lied. Call you out right there, Josh. You intentionally lied because we have footage of what was going on in the event. Never happened. So these guys have been just regardlessly just continuing to hammer this stuff.
Is that like the Canadian Kyle Rittenhouse version? Where
I wouldn't say Kyle Rittenhouse. I mean, he didn't unalive anybody, although there's videos of him and his friends shooting off guns in the States, I'm assuming. But I mean, I wouldn't say Kyle Rittenhouse as much as just running around and just spewing anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ propaganda, like everywhere to anybody who can listen.
Yeah, this guy's more on the Billboard Chris side than he is on the Rittenhouse side, I would say.
Oh, him and Billboard Chris were here on June 9th in 2022. They were, 2023, where they were marching together being anti-trans. So, yeah.
I mean, I love to see, evangelical Christianity reduced to like literally some jackass with a sandwich board draped over him saying the end is nigh. I love to see them out there in the street just desperately trying to resuscitate the last remnants of Christianity in Canada, but it looks good on them. But yeah, they're certainly trying to have some kind of political effect, that's for certain.
It is. They're trying to get into politics. I mean, they've now definitely done it in the States. Now they're going to try to do it in Canada.
Well, and the campaign that, I know we're not officially in a federal campaign, but we might as well be. It has those same kind of Trump feels to it already, right? There's a lot of similarities in terms of, from a marketing perspective, and that's all it really is. It'll be probably not a lot of substance to go with. It seems like not having a platform is the new platform. From municipal elections, provincial, Ontario, like we're still waiting for official platforms from folks, substantial ones, and like nothing. You just get like talking points, but the polls aren't pretty. I'm not sure if that was like next on the agenda or what, but I actually, Joe, I wondered if you could, it's one thing to see Trump saddling up to evangelical Christians or Pierre Polyev doing it, but then we're starting to see with that kind of intermingling of these values with state power, how it's manifesting itself. Particularly, like you had some examples coming out of Oklahoma, where they're feeling really emboldened to be like some sort of ultra Christian state. And like we might not see it to this extent, but I think it's worth sharing so folks can see how this starts to leak into legislation.
So this particular thing, I'm going to start off with this particular note that I got from a friend of mine. And this has to do very much with the idea that while we have Trump right now literally peppering everybody with just executive order and just everything else that just keeps your eyes busy and it's tiring you, and it's intentionally done by design because they want to get you disconnected by overloading you. Things like this get to sneak around unchallenged because everybody's just too busy or disconnects. So Oklahoma's legislation this year is currently reviewing these following 4 bills. Currently, 3 of them in the Senate and 1 of them in the House. The first one would, and I've got the breakdowns of the actual bills if I want to go into details, but the summaries are, SB 484 makes it illegal for homeless shelters and outreach to exist outside of Tulsa and Oklahoma City. This also includes battered women's shelters.
I just want to jump in. I just want to jump in because there are Canadian examples of this happening. Not explicitly, but through the criminalization that Ford is going through in Ontario. So I can't speak to other provinces just yet, but I can tell you for sure that the advocates that work with encampments or with the people who rely on encampments, live in encampments, and who do housing advocacy and whatnot, and safe consumption site advocacy, they are preparing to be charged, and they're already, in Hamilton, there's counselors there trying to essentially criminalize even legal support work for homeless people. And that isn't a stretch. Like some of these other ones you might think like, oh, that's impossible. That would never happen here. But it absolutely is. So yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but like just draw that parallel.
You're absolutely right, because I mean, I think it's an important lesson that everybody needs to learn, which is you need to drop the idea that anything's impossible anymore. Like, oh, this is impossible. This would never happen here. No, it can. We've been saying, oh my God, I can't believe they're actually doing this now for a couple of years. We need to just accept that anything is possible. Any horrible thing is possible. And yeah, criminalizing the encampments that people are just trying to survive is horrible as it's enough. This one, it goes even further, saying, yeah, the shelters that we want them to go to, we are going to make those illegal too if they're not in the areas that we want. And we're making it very limited. Again, this only helps the penal system in regards to making more demand on cells, which helps the private prison system in the U.S. by just taking homeless people and starting filling up the cells and passing more money to it. That's the first of the 4 bills. Number 2, SB 228 adds a new type of marriage in Oklahoma. Divorce is only allowed for specific reasons, including abandonment for at least 1 year, abuse, adultery, physical or sexual, adultery. Counseling is required before filing for divorce, except in cases of abuse and criminal convictions. Number 3, child tax credit given to families with kids only when both parents are married and the biological parents of children. This excludes with adoptive parents, step-parents, single parents, and other alternative roles. And then House Bill 1006 would require schools to display a poster or framed copy of the 10 Commandments.
Well, to be fair, Polyev just wants to end the tax credit for everyone equally. he would equally fuck over every kid in Canada. But I guess if he thought he could just single that out to the folks he hated most, he would. But that's just horrific. You know, there's so many families out there in the United States right now running GoFundMe's or fundraising in order to flee. So, like, I don't want to hear anybody start, like, not that anyone here is doing that, but you see a lot of, like, shitting on Americans, like, as a people, like, as fellow members of the working class. And, like, that's not it, people. That's really not the angle. Like, surely they did not want to get themselves into this position. And when you see the real-time effects it's having on people, no matter who they voted for, you know, you live amongst people who voted for Ford and other horrific characters. So, like, they still deserve to be part of the community, right? Maybe better informed members of the community. So, like, shunning them and mocking them isn't the solution. But yeah, it's nothing is a far stretch anymore. Like, some of these are kind of very specific, but I imagine Oklahoma's not going to be the only one either, right? It's like, it doesn't just embolden states, but companies, right? Companies are just like axing all their DEIs from their websites. It's become like a status symbol, and individuals then become more emboldened to speak in a certain way or throw out certain gestures. And yeah, it's hard to say that this isn't going to have like real life implications on a lot of people and drift north of the border. I don't care how many Blackhawks you deploy, you know, like, we just soak up a lot of this, sometimes maybe the worst part of the political narratives down south.
Yeah, and education's a real big part of how all this works too, both in the respect that, like, even in Canada, our education systems are not that far removed from religious meddling. For example, like, when I grew up in Sydney, I went to a school. I picked a different school than I was supposed to go to for junior high, and I had a free period because there was a Roman Catholic religion class that you could opt out of that was taught by the principal. And so for all 3 years, I had a free period because I was already sort of like not a faithful person at that point. I had already told my mom I wasn't going to be going to church anymore. So my poor mother, she tried. God love her. But not only is it's not that far away, and obviously we know that there's a whole Roman Catholic school board in Ontario. When you look, so I work on a website for an athletic association for schools out in Alberta, and like the naming of their schools, it's like just looking through what their schools are called out there. It's just and it's not entirely reflective of how religious the place is, because statistically it's actually not as religious as some other places. But it's all like Our Lady of the Flaming Sword of Christian Justice, kind of over the top, like really over the, not Our Lady of Wisdom, not like the sort of like usual stuff. It's like really over the top imagery and naming. But yeah, like obviously like we're not actually as far from religious meddling in our schools as we would hope, but also like in terms of like talking about Americans and talking about how like, well, it's become this sort of like anti-American thing. Like their education system has been under attack for years. Our education system has been under attack for years, and we're starting to see it now. You've got a whole cadre of people, like I'll go back to the convoy. You've got a whole like cadre of people who are convinced enough that they can spam the governor general into overturning the government, that they up and picked up and brought, in some cases, their kids to Ottawa for a month. And I'm like, guys, it doesn't work that way. Like it doesn't, like the MOU, like it doesn't work that way at all. I mean, this is basic civics that you should know, that you can't do that. It's not going to work, and you can't even force the government's hand to do it. So this is the thing, is like, that's all like largely uneducated people. It's largely people that only have high school. And we're not, like in Canada, it costs $10,000 a year to learn critical thinking because they don't want to teach it in schools because it makes the kids more difficult to manage. So this is why I think a lot of people put a lot of focus on education and politics, and why it's of critical importance, and it's very hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube once you start making cuts.
Oh, well, anyone in Ontario can tell you that, like, the repair backlog is like in the billions, just to put a roof over their head, right? So the push to make the public education system just so dreary and drab and untenable is, to purposely leave a certain group of people behind. And as uneducated as possible, because when you look at the polls, like you vote more progressively the more education that you have. But it's yeah. Again, I just want to draw back to I'm not a fan of religion, but it isn't an attack on religion or even saying, folks don't need protecting ever, but it's just like you see that they are able to rally a larger group set of people than just what you might be like, oh, I don't even know any evangelical Christians, here in Canada that would buy into a lot of that. But I do see a lot of people buying into this need to like protect the definition of marriage or gender, especially, right? Like, or even drugs and alcohol and, crime. It all starts to just fit all of these narratives a little too nicely, and it helps like bolster in even moderates, it just generates that moral panic that exists that's not necessarily rooted in any religion. But I don't know, I think people, conservatives, they couch it in Canada language of traditional, right? Like that's what conservatism traditionally is, right? Is to like go back to the roots and hold on to the way, we were structured before, and, gender roles play into that for them.
Like the old stock Canadians did.
Yeah, and I think, like even if Pierre thinks it's like a little risky to go with these groups, that's also like a dog whistle for him, right? Like to gather that larger, to say like, I'm actually serious about this. And yeah, it's kind of leaking into their language about fentanyl. And I want to kind of transition to the next topic there, because it's great that fentanyl deaths are getting the exposure that they need, right? It kind of started with Trump. I don't know how that happened, like how all of a sudden he has sparked, like, but in the worst ways, right? Because the responses that we are seeing are everything we don't need. But it started with the appointing of a fentanyl czar. And when I was doing my notes, and when I think about it, it's always, and it was to appease Trump, right? Like he actually doesn't care about the drug trade. He's just really hopped up on securing the border and appearing like he's a strong arm and authoritarian, and it's all necessary. But it's mostly about migrants, but he wants us to care about moms who are losing their kids, right? That's the narrative. Like even Pierre Poilievre, I don't want one more mother to bury their face in their hands because they've lost another person to overdose. But these are the same fucks that are closing safe consumption sites and demonizing all the work around a safe drug supply. Like they would just scoff at that solution. And so their solution is to just throw everybody in fucking prison. But, did you know that the Liberals actually pitched this to Trump? That the idea of a fentanyl czar wasn't his idea, was not Trump's. I know Trump doesn't have a lot of original ideas, like we already said that, but I would have always thought it was like him saying...
I think his last great one was using nukes on hurricanes, so...
Yeah, or bringing back the doctors who worked on JFK. I know he didn't say it, that wasn't his quote, but like that's how they're going to reinvestigate. She's in one of these Republican women, she's up there going, oh yeah, we're going to call back people that were sitting on the panel that investigated the death, and like the last person to die was like 19 years ago. Like they're gone. And anyway, but sidetracked, totally sidetracked. But fentanyl. So Trump didn't even come up with this idea. This was Trudeau or, in his group's idea. They pitched this. We'll put one of these, their favorite national intelligence chiefs, basically, former RCMP officer Kevin Brousseau, is going to be a fentanyl czar. Why are they using this language? I don't even know if that's going to be part of our discussion, but like, what strange language to use around this. They're also, it's his mandate there is just to really work closely with U.S. counterparts and law enforcement agencies, and to accelerate Canada's ongoing work to detect, disrupt, and dismantle. I feel like that's like a slogan for our show, but the fentanyl trade. no idea how they're going to do this at all, but definitely not through the routes that advocates. It does seem to come from this total law and order approach, and that's just going to end up killing more people. But it's the comments that Ford, so like that opened the gates, but then Ford, Danielle Smith, Pierre Polyev, they're all grabbing onto this. I guess they're seeing it resonate with the polls, with the people, and
Fentanyl's a boogeyman.
Yeah, first they couldn't, Trudeau couldn't appoint the czar fast enough. He announced there was going to be an appointment, and all of a sudden, even though we're not sitting, like, this guy's on his way out, Trudeau's like, I don't even work here anymore. And they're like, no, appoint him now. We need it now. We care about fentanyl deaths so bad, like, do it now. Like, all week, that's all they kept talking about until they got it. And now they're like, Pierre Poilievre's like, well, we shouldn't just do it because Trump said we should do it, but yeah, okay, we should be harder on fentanyl. But I'm gonna one up you guys, and I'm gonna suggest that we do mandatory minimum life sentences for anyone with 40 milligrams of fentanyl, which is an amount that a lot of users would likely have on them. And it's completely unconstitutional. Mandatory minimums have been shot down by our courts many times. He's talking about using the notwithstanding clause to take away judges' discretion and to make sure that he gets his way on this. And then you couple that shit with Ford getting another hot mic moment. So Premier Ford of Ontario, he's talking to a group of people. I forgot who he was talking to, if anyone can remember. But they catch in the Toronto Star prints an article that's behind a paywall that he says, I want to throw them all, what's the quote? Put them in...
send him to Old Sparky. This is the death penalty thing, right? Yeah.
The electric chair. That's a reference to the electric chair.
Yeah.
And
which even the Americans don't even use that much anymore. I think maybe Florida and one or two other states still use the chair, but like most of them did away with it.
Yeah, and his press secretary's like, oh, they're trying to walk it back. No, he doesn't even believe in the death penalty, but he does think that they should be locked up for a very, very long time. And, like, we know we get one Ford when there's hot mics, and then we get another Ford, which is like the press release Ford. But this is what he truly believes. Like, they just fucking hate poor people, and they hate, because they don't hate all drug users. Those fucks are doing rails off of whatever table they've got at their parties. Like, they're not like a drug-free zone. This is faux moral panic. They only hate the people that are dying on the streets, alone. Poor addicts, drug users.
I mean, I do think it's populism at work. Like, having doorstepped a little bit in Nova Scotia now, like one of the things I really wasn't ready for is that people hate addicts. They hate them with a vehemence that I can't explain. When I was canvassing for the New Democrats, we had free ambulances on the platform. We were going to stop charging people for ambulance rides. And I had people say to me, the druggies are going to be using that as a taxi service. And like, people are more upset that public dollars would ever be used to ease the suffering of some of the people who suffer the most in our society than they are about most other issues. And it's a certain type of person. You don't hear it from everyone, but that's what I hear when I hear this sort of like really, really over the top language about fentanyl. And it bookends with things in the States where like the fentanyl crisis is quite visible in the States, partially because of tranq, partially because of like this new fentanyl variant where you see people just like standing up but like slouched over. There's a lot of imagery about that, and so it's become a really, really visible problem. And it's become a big problem, especially in a lot of the Rust Belt states. Like it's a huge crisis because, again, like we know that like underlying social conditions are what cause drug addiction to rise and substance abuse to rise, but they of course can't acknowledge that because it doesn't fit. But yeah, that to me, I'm seeing in terms of the strong language about it. I think it's populism. I think they're speaking to their base who thinks that addiction is a moral failing. And those folks out there who just hate drug addicts, hate them personally. There's not enough suffering in the world out there for drug addicts to endure. But also, in terms of the czar, I think that what the Canadian government is in a position right now where like Donald Trump is making threats, some of which are real, some of which are not, some of which are just positioning, some of which are like the initial high price on storage wars or auction hunters or whatever, like that high price you create to set expectations, knowing that you are going to work yourself down to a lower price later. So that's what a lot of these bigger blustery gestures, I think, of the Trump government are. But Canadians are concerned. So the Canadian government is in a position where like they know some of these threats are not material, but they have to act as if they are. And so to me, what this sounds like is they went to something that they thought would appeal to Donald Trump. They thought it's a czar, it's an authoritarian thing, it's a cop, it's immediate action, it's something to give him to go back to Americans and say, look, we made them do the thing, look, we won this concession, but it's relatively meaningless. Like the amount of fentanyl that's crossing the border from Canada into the United States is 0.2% of all the fentanyl that ever enters that country. So like it's not like it's all 100% like they're going to put some civil servant in some job and say that they've done something about it, just to give him something to go back to the American people with, such that hopefully he backs down on some of these other things. But like when he went ahead with the tariffs, we should have axed the fentanyl czar. We should have retaliated. Like that's what I think they got wrong.
Well, yeah, there's steps that the government needs to do to address the fentanyl trade, but the things that are already there under these premiers, because Danielle Smith is the same, right? As Ford, they're the same ones ending safe consumption sites, going after the folks, because those aren't just places where you can be revived with naloxone or address an overdose. They're community hubs that test the drug supply, that issue warnings about the drug supply, that are sometimes just a place to be so that you're not alone, and that is what actually can prevent a lot of overdose deaths, as well as a safe drug supply. But those politicians won't go anywhere near this, and we've given so many examples now. And there'll be more. Prisons. That's the solution to everything, is prisons. And then even I got a flyer to my door from Carolyn Mulrooney for the election here, and one of the points at the bottom is like, we'll build more prisons. And we have, again, like billions of dollars backlog because our school roofs are leaking, but we are going to build more prisons. And it's just, that is a huge fucking red flag, folks.
We're going to build more prison because right now we're over capacity in the prisons because we're locking up people who have not even been convicted. 80% of the people there right now are not even convicted of anything. But yeah, we are going to build more prisons so that our system of JP, who can absolutely remove somebody's rights of freedom of movement without any legal background, short of a course, they're not lawyers. Yeah, that's what we're doing. We are aiding them to be, we're just going to be locking more up, and as well as now that we're going to be adding in people who are on drugs, instead of trying to get them help and addressing the issues. No, we're just going to lock them up. And those homeless people, we're going to lock those up too. We're going to lock up everything that just makes the city look a little bit unpretty.
Again, yeah, it's the narrative that these are moral failings on people's part, that like these things are happening because all of a sudden people became morally flawed and not because of like obvious measurable changes in people's material circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. It's much easier to say, no, it's a moral failing. Don't morally fail like these people. So just don't end up in any predicament that, regardless of your income situation or anything else, or else you're going to be there. It's similar to the fear of capitalism. You need to have people be poor to make sure that the workers stay employed and happy.
I want to share a story that Lorraine Lamb shared on her Instagram. You can find her at Lorraine Lamb Chops, at Lorraine Lamb Chops. And there's no B in Lamb, it's Lam. That is her last name. And she does a lot of advocacy work around homelessness. And it just speaks to some of the impacts of our jail systems being overcrowded and the attitudes that we have towards the incarcerated. She talks about a man named Bob. And Joe, I'm wondering if you could share the article that's first under that headline.
I see it. Yeah, I see it right.
I want to say his last name. Bob was incarcerated in the Niagara region, and just a few days after being released was found frozen to death. And Lorraine talks about some of the conditions which lead to cases like Bob's, where the loved ones or the supports for those incarcerated are never even sure when they're going to be released. Like, they don't know what time of day, even when the time is there. They don't know if it's going to be that month sometimes. Like, the court systems are so backlogged and slow. And even, like I say, the day of release, it could be like 5 p.m., it could be later at night. And like, quite often when that happens, all of the community places to go are closed or over capacity. And quite often when people are released, they're released with exactly what they had with them when they were arrested. And so the seasons can change, or you could be arrested with quite insufficient items to survive the cold. And that does not play into the court at all. That doesn't change your release in any way. The conditions, the environmental conditions, the economic conditions facing you, it's like they're just thrown away even after they've served their time. And right now, folks are living in really cramped conditions within the jail system as well. Like, what were the numbers that Lorraine gave? I know, Joe, you were talking about that earlier too, but
80% of people right now in there are not even convicted of anything. They're just all pretrial, and that's huge in regards to just not having the ability. Yeah, there's no other reason there except that the city or the world feels they shouldn't be out in the open because they don't have how do I put it? They don't feel safe with them in public for other reasons, so they're just going to keep them incarcerated. This is one of the reasons that can be given by justice. It's like, yeah, I don't feel you should be out. Doesn't really matter if you should be out or not. I don't feel you should be out. It is sufficient in our legal system as an argument for someone to be detained indefinitely.
Yeah.
By justice.
I think there's a lot that's difficult to wrestle with in the carceral system about the ways that we treat people before they have been convicted of a crime, which are still in and of themselves punitive, and which arguably are contrary to the way that we conceive about the sort of like the presumption of innocence. Like, you can't tell me that, like, so if you put someone in remand for 8 months and they're found not guilty, like, why did they just do 8 months in jail? You know what I mean? Like, why would, like, there was no reason to do that. It just took you too long to figure out there was no good reason to do that. So yeah, there's a lot about
theories.
Yeah, but there's a lot about that that's like, it's how do you, because like there's a whole, like, the whole point is that the cops shouldn't be in a position to punish people. Like, you don't let the angry, jacked up, overpaid, undereducated thug whose entire toolbox is violence make the decision about how someone is going to be punished. You do that with a sober second thought later on in a courtroom with the judge. But there's all kinds of ways in which the cops are empowered to punish people before they've ever seen a judge, including, like, being just arrested or whatever, manhandled, or all the, like, or being shot has been the case for so many Indigenous people in the last year here in Canada.
And I've got a bit of experience right now with the court system, having my friend right now incarcerated. It doesn't stop with the cops.
No.
It will continue with the Crown. So the other great thing that the Crown wants to do is they just want to get conviction. They don't care how. They'll just do it. So the idea of justice is to try to find if you're right or wrong, and then, obviously, based on evidence and a jury or peers or just the judge, get a conviction. But the Crown doesn't care about that. They just want their conviction. And so, knowing the court system is long, knowing they have the power to influence, particularly in Ontario, the justice of the peace to be allowed, whether or not the person is going to follow, especially around Ottawa, whatever, quite often the Crown will dictate to the justice of the peace whether or not the person should be released or not, and if so, what conditions it can be. And so if they don't want a person to be out, they'll say they don't want them out, and they stay in jail. Hence the 80% in capacity. And the idea there is that the Crown will try to look benevolent. Regardless of the status of whether or not you did a crime, they will give you a plea deal. And the alternative is you stay in jail till your court date, which is usually 1 or 2 years away, or you take their plea deal, which is an automatic conviction, generally an automatic conviction on their part, and they're able to close the case and get the win. This isn't justice. This is bullying. And this is how we have it right now.
Yeah, it's absolutely coercive. Like, you can't say, okay, sign this or spend the next year in jail when you've not been convicted of a crime.
Absolutely. And that's exactly this is exactly our system we have there. I mean, we used to watch medieval, old movies where, the king or the sheriff would lock somebody up, and it's like, we're going to keep you in our dungeon until you sign this admitting your guilt, then we can execute you or whatever. This is not much different. I mean, execution, no, it's not what we're going to be doing. But if you're forced an innocent person to either live out 2 years without work, without contact with family or anything else, and they're going to give them a deal, yeah, that deal is a conviction, which means suddenly now they also have a criminal record, the scarlet letter. So they're forced to make a decision of staying 2 years to prove that they're innocent, or take the deal so they can get out to see their family and try to win money. But they're now forced in a condition that they've now got a criminal record, which means they're going to have limits in what they can do employment-wise, or where they can go, or where they can travel, all because somebody just wanted to strong arm a conviction.
That happens at the bail stage too. I think we talked about that in our activist tips last week, where they'll hold you, try to get you to sign on to very strict and suppressive bail conditions, unconstitutional bail conditions, which is the last stage before you can be released. And it's a bit of a waiting game that folks can play. Like, there's a level of privilege in being able to stay in prison, or in jail rather, and wait for legal counsel to, argue down some of these bail conditions. But generally, people are in a tight spot. They need to go home, and they have responsibilities, and they want out of jail. And so they will sign on to these strict bail conditions that, really limit them even if they're free while waiting for their court date, right? They have curfew, they have people they can't talk to, they have limitations on their freedom of protest and speech. And, it's a never-ending cycle that our politicians are really kind of gearing up. I feel like both the federal and now even hints of the provincial election, where this law and order narrative is starting to, they're trying to outdo one another in who can be toughest on crime. And that's not going to end well for any of us, because, the episode that we dropped this week for Blueprints of Disruption was with movement lawyers who work mostly out of Toronto, but in Ontario. And what they are experiencing at the hands of the Ontario Attorney General's office and when dealing with Palestinian solidarity activists is next level. It's fascism. They don't use that label. They're lawyers. They have to couch their language very carefully, but I can say it. I can say that it's malicious prosecution of a lot of people simply for protesting. And what is happening on top of all of these kind of oppressive conditions that we talk about is the application of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. That's where I'm going with our next topic, because the Toronto District School Board, just like the courts are starting to apply this new definition that conflates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, right? It conflates legitimate criticism of Israel with being anti-Jewish, right? And this, Blueprints of Disruption, there's many episodes, where we have really broken this down and why that's a problem, and spoken to anti-Zionist Jews, and to fully understand why that is actually anti-Semitic in itself to say these things, right? To conflate the two, to assume that all Jewish people are Zionists, or that even the idea of Zionism needing protecting. Ideologically wise, like one of the lawyers that we interviewed, Arash, he spoke of having a conversation with a Crown attorney in Ontario, a Crown attorney, like someone who should be like, they're not an intern, they're not articling anymore. They should know. And they ask him point blank, like, is anti-Zionism the same as anti-Semitism? Like, is that racist to be anti-Zionist? And, having to explain that to folks who have been tasked with prosecuting these folks and determining whether or not their conduct is hateful, right? Because that's where it starts to play into the courts, this definition of either hate crime or hate motivated crimes, and it really has implications on folks that are arrested. And the Toronto District School Board has adopted or is in the process of implementing that same conflation, that same anti-Semitic, ethno-state driven definition of what it means to be anti-Semitic. So here's kind of the tidbits. Like just yesterday, the vote went 13-5, where all the school trustees, Toronto District School Board, vote on whether or not to accept this report. And the report openly has lines in there that say, Jewish and or Zionist identities, because they're talking about combating anti-Semitism in schools and how to protect Jewish students and create a better atmosphere where anti-Semitism doesn't happen. But throughout the document, they are conflating the two, and they are asking for Zionism to be a protected class under the anti-racism policies that they use in the school, right? And so, I mean, folks, I guess if you're new, Zionism is the belief in an ethno-state, in the ethno-state of Israel, in the project of apartheid, right? In the exclusive use of land for a religious group of people. And it's based on the idea that because the Holocaust happened, there is no safe place for Jewish people. But this argument is bolstered by people who live and breathe outside of Israel quite safely. So, but it's besides the point. Then what it turns into is anything that you say negative about Israel is actually then legally starting to be defined and educationally presented to our children as being wrong, as requiring intervention, right? It's not just like, oh, it has a definition of being anti-Semitism. Well, that means punishment. That means censorship. So that means like a Palestinian child within the Toronto District School Board can't advocate for a free Palestine, because that would mean an end to the ethno-state, right? The end of Zionism. And this is a precedent we just don't want to set, right? Like this, it is being set, so Ontario officially has already adopted this definition. And so it's no wonder we're seeing it through the courts. But these folks mobilized at the school board level. There were delegations, there were like 2 days of delegations, and it went back and forth. There were more, I believe, delegates to oppose this report. It didn't matter. In the end, it passed. But even if they were outnumbered, like the Zionists really did mobilize around this. They have resources, they have networks in the same way that we do. And really, just like we saw the far right go after school boards in terms of targeting trans youth and LGBTQ, very few school boards are flying the pride flag anymore. And this is because of that kind of mobilization around the school boards. It's that point of pressure that sometimes we forget about. We go after municipal politicians, like the mayors, the councillors, and provincial and federal for sure. We know how they play a role. But this front of, when we're talking about like war, is one that, some people thankfully are spending some resources on. So there's Toronto Palestinian families are working to kind of combat this. I have a petition for folks to sign that I'll share in the comments. But
before you share, while you're sharing that, I wanted to show the two highlights that were done by Samira here in regards to her posting about this. The first one is here, where it's the underscore is exactly at the bottom there, and it is engage unions and professionals, organizations to support Jewish staff, including staff who believe they are not supported due to their Jewish identities and or Zionist ideologies. So for their religion and their politics. As well as, get this one correct. This one is from Professional Learning. Provide professional learning to staff and trustees to deepen an understanding of anti-Semitism, including modern manifestations such as anti-Zionism, intersectionality, and Jewish identity diversity.
I think it's really apparent in the language that's used in this, and in a lot of the language that the Zionist groups have used to advance their ideals in Canada. Um, I think there's an extent to which the deference to identity that has been propagated in sort of like left and center left political existence has kind of set us up for this. Like these folks are doing Bodies and Spaces about like an explicitly white colonial imperialist ideology. And like we've been conditioning unwittingly our politicians and our sort of like mucky mucks on various elected committees throughout our society to defer to identity. And that's what we're seeing now as we're seeing this exhortation to deference to a fictionalized version of Jewish identity. And so I do think that part of it is we need to get back to like identity is not validity. And that's a real like, and you can see that in organizing spaces like within our own movements is that there's an utter deference to identity as a form of validity. And we need to start backing away from that because it's rhetoric that's this easily abused is bad rhetoric, in my view. So I think that's a problem. Also, I remember the days when the IHRA definition was supposed to be non-binding. You guys remember that? Like when they first started floating these, when we first started seeing sort of motions for this on the floor at NDP convention or whatever, like whatever organization is considering adopting it, it was always framed as non-binding, and we see now that that's nonsense. We see now that it was a way to soft pedal what is an explicitly hardline document.
Well, and what a tool for any advocates going into these space advocates. I hate giving them that name. Lobbyists going into this space and saying, well, like, look, the province adopted this definition. What's the problem? Right? Canada adopts it federally. What's the problem? Like it's so easy to then implement it on very tangible levels, binding levels after that. Right. And so, yeah, it made it easy to kind of get through the legislature. I mean, he's got a majority here. There was no not stopping it. But you know what I mean? It wasn't that be all end all battle, perhaps for some, because of that non-binding language. But no, that is a floodgate just opened, right? Green light. This is the new definition. And we see police, prosecutors, teachers, and like the same organizations that were advocating for this report and deputize like the worst of the worst sent in letters and shared them then on social media, like super Karens, I think someone, or ultra Karens was a term that was brought up. But it really was just like spewing anti-Palestinian racism. And it was like the same organizations who suggested people put bounties on reporting students or teachers back to their organization, back to Zionist lobbyist groups, when they go into the schools and teach about anti-Semitism, should they get any pushback, any criticism of Israel, to be reporting those people, to be reporting students back to the organization, for what end? To like dox them, shame them, suggest the principle that they need re-education. Because, in case anybody missed it, in the episode we launched, and I put a few videos out there because it's something that astonished me, that there are Jewish comrades of ours that have been arrested for Palestinian work that are being offered re-education classes by the Crown to avoid jail time or to lessen the penalty that they may be facing. And I got this from the lawyers and I wanted it firsthand from somebody, and I did. I contacted somebody I know who has been arrested by the Toronto police and are Jewish, and I asked them if they had been offered classes, and they said no, but I was offered a mediated conversation with a rabbi to better understand the damage I've done to the Jewish community. And I replied, I'm assuming you turned it down. And the response was like, fuck yeah, I turned that down. Because, that doesn't scream fash, like re-education programs and like telling our schools that this is the definition and like basically hands off Israel on every level. That is so disconcerting. It's all part of the colonial project. That's why Canada defends. I mean, we've said it before, but I think we should repeat it every episode because people are like, why is Canada so fervently defending this, and Canadian officials just spewing all of this
history.
Yeah, that's our history. Where do you think they learned it? Where do you think they learned the bulk of this, right? We invented much of the versions of apartheid that we've seen throughout history here in Canada. So,
I think we
yeah.
share with the U.S., but not to take anything away from it. But yeah, we
Well, I
definitely
could share.
were
I'm
added to
gladly
it.
share the shame.
Yeah, no, we should share the shame. That's the
Okay.
problem right now. We're not sharing the shame.
Oh, we mean we like to
Nobody.
point to the U.S. as like being so evil.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
We're,
Yes,
we're not that much better.
I love telling my mom, taking my mom down a notch, like, but why? Why Canada Day? Like, why can't we have a barbecue on Canada Day? And I'm like, Mom, buckle up. I've got a couple stories for you. They're always new ones. She's like, no. Like, I told her about the mining companies, and she's like, what? I don't know what I'll tell her
Meanwhile, the
about this
fun at
week. Or maybe
dinners.
I'll give her a week off of shaming Canada for her. But yeah, like, so folks that want to take a look at what your school boards are doing, no doubt they're being, especially the larger ones in urban centers, they are being lobbied with reports like this. So it's like you have to be on the school board. You have to be watching these meetings to even know that someone's presenting this whack ass report to them that they are then going to, it's kind of like when Ontario, it's non-binding report. It's like, here's what we should do. But then some idiot can go in and be like, hey, this is what we should do. And you have a report that you actually accepted. Remember all these experts, and you said, yeah, we'll take this report. So the precedent is there. Let's just do it. Let's start suspending students who say fuck Israel. If they're not doing that already, but we saw them send students with kafiyas home. They have to face backlash for this, or they'll get away with a whole lot more.
It's
So
only gonna get worse.
This
yeah,
is one of the vulnerabilities in democratizing some of our institutions, unfortunately. Like, for example, in Nova Scotia, we actually abolished school boards a few years back, and most people were kind of upset about it. And I was like, I think that's great because they're too vulnerable. The problem is, like in Halifax, for example, the ballot that you fill out for the mayor and for the councillor also has your school board rep on it. So you have a lot of people who like they don't know, they're just not tapped in, and so they'll pick any name they recognize or no name at all. And so like there's, because we have this low, and it's a problem more broadly, and you've seen it in Ontario, and we've seen it here in provincial elections, where like you have sub 50% election turnout. Like you have a majority of people opting out of a majoritarian system, to which I kind of find myself asking, like, does that system have legitimacy anymore at all? If a majority of people said, I don't want anything to do with anything on offer. But this is the thing, is that you have a very narrow group of people. And I think that's why a lot of these like ostensibly grassroots, deeply funded obviously, but ostensibly grassroots organizers in the States, conservative organizers, are telling their people to get involved in like library boards and school boards. It's because no one's paying attention and no one's invested. And no one's participating, and it's very, very easy. The cost of entry for bad actors is very, very low to get involved and to offer for school board and like maybe just be acclaimed because nobody else ran. You know what I mean?
Said, like, folks, you can get on too.
Well, yeah, this is the thing, and in instances where that's available to people, I do think they should do that. In Nova Scotia, where it's like weirdly lucky and unlucky in ways, in that all of our parties are kind of clustered around the center. So, like for example, in October of 23, when there was an anti-SOGI protest here in Nova Scotia, the premier told them in no uncertain terms to pound sand. There was no purchase for them at all. With the conservative, again, we have a PC government here, a conservative government, and so you might suspect they would be vulnerable to that sort of thing. And he told them to take a hike, and they had like okay numbers that time. Like we had about 350 of us on our side, and they had around 250 on their side. And it might have been the fact that like there was hey, Tammy Jakeman's in the comments.
She's calling you out in the comments.
Good.
And I'm about to as well. Don't worry.
That's what Tammy Jakeman is for calling people out on their BS. And I love that about her. But this is the thing, is like that's a huge, I see it as a huge vulnerability currently in the way that it works. I think that there's similar vulnerabilities, it seems, even in our provincial electoral system.
I know, but Sean, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You're ready to undo all of our work around, identity is what you called it. But, there's been a lot of work there in recognizing that us white faces take up a lot of space sometimes.
But I will defend Sean in regards to, there is absolutely a bit of a weakness when it comes to school boards, because he's absolutely right. I mean, we've seen the Ontario turnouts are very low. When it comes to engagement to the school board, it's also very disconnected. And I watched during the last municipal election in Ottawa, the attempt by a few of the places where they tried to get both counselors that were more anti-vax, more right-wing, as well as they tried hard to try to get school trustees that were in the same thought process, because they wanted to start there and start
Okay.
moving your way up the chain. Start there, then get them to counselors, then get them to MPPs, and then you start having your people where you want them.
I'm of the opinion that education should be left to experts. I actually don't care what truckers think about education at all. Not
Okay,
even
first
close.
of all, like, yeah, representation, I think, should be representation, right? Like, it shouldn't necessarily be a means of uh, a matter of finding experts. But I'm going to go to Tammy's point here, and I might be like bastardizing your point too a bit, like, but the need for local representation or local power is so important, especially when we have politicians like the ones we're experiencing. I mean, the same democratic failings that give us or will give us fucking super majorities of Doug Ford are the same kind of problems that exist on the smaller level. Like the solution is, for me, is not to do away with those mechanisms, but to solidify them, like understand them as the left. I think some of these areas are areas that we probably would gain more by engaging with those than we gain by engaging with federal politics. Like, let's be real. Like, what have we fucking accomplished there? Almost nothing. And we've kind of left the school boards and we've left the more local races to the right. They sense that vulnerability, but we can patch that up. That's fixable. What's not fixable is not having a mechanism to defend against fascists, right? And even our school boards are kind of just products of the province, right? The province could get rid of school boards here in Ontario. And in fact, Ford has threatened to do that when they tried to push back, when they tried to say, we can't do this budget, asshole. Like, we're not going to tell our schools that they're not going to get new roofs. Like, we reject this budget. We reject not cleaning the air in our school. Like, we want health initiatives in our schools, and like, you just won't have a mechanism for that if you give away your local bits of power, because at some point, like, a lot of people advocate for strengthening those smaller community networks so that we can fight back when we need to, but I think the vulnerabilities that exist in any democracy, we're far more vulnerable leaving all of our education to a Sam Oosterhoff, right? When there's no other layer of people that are like closely involved with that community and those kids' education and can be held accountable a lot easier than we can hold, like, our minister of education accountable if you can fucking find them. But these trustees, they live in amongst us. I know where Carolyn Butterworth is, and I know how to find her. And if I have a problem with how she's voting, she's going to hear about it, like probably at the grocery store, not behind some huge wall. So, like, it's a battleground that we probably don't have the resources for, but fuck, I would rather you go run for school board than be stamping for the Ontario NDP right now for all the good it's going to be doing you.
That's fair. And I'll just push back. Like, you've talked about, like, I know where my my school board rep lives. Like, so do the violent lunatics who are pushing anti-Sochi stuff right now. This is the thing, is these people, like, the people in these positions, and there's all kinds of precedent for this in the States, are just being intimidated out of office. Another point I'll make too, and I'll respond to Tammy's comment, which I think is valid. And Tammy, for context, works in the education system. She's an EPA, so she's got firsthand experience with this, and I have a ton of respect for her opinion about this stuff. Brendan Maguire was democratically elected. I mean, this is the thing. There's an extent to which we democratize some things and not others. Like, we don't let a committee design a bridge. We don't let a committee of non-experts make engineering decisions. You know what I mean? That's a skilled profession. You have to do the work, or you don't get a say. You have to get the credentials. You have to prove ability. You have to prove competence in that profession before you are allowed to make binding decisions about what happens in that profession. And likewise, like it's true that, like, that they're, like, again, like Brendan Maguire, like, for however much you like him or don't like him, he's or whatever. Actually, I'm not sure that's his last name even, but like, he's democratically elected too. Like, this is the thing. And like, so creating these vulnerabilities right now, where we let, like, I don't think that it should be a matter of populist opinion. I don't think it should be a matter of like who can get the most people to go to a meeting. When we're talking about things where, like, there's established professional precedent as to how these things should be run, and I don't think it makes sense to democratize something that important. to that extent. I think there should be some democratization. Like obviously, like, the education minister is a democratically elected official. And like that I support. But in terms of like the cost benefit analysis right now of having elected school boards does not add up for me.
All right. Well, I'm just going to let the school board discussion kind of die. Not because it's not important, but just because, we have segments that we're just trying to move through. But, it's definitely an area folks should maybe pay more attention to either way. I feel like it's something that's gone by the wayside. In Ontario, though, like we've seen it a huge battleground, and I just can't imagine what's next. But there's still ways folks can fight back to that last story that we're talking about. Please check through the chat there for the action.org. There's a petition there, but that gets you in touch with the people that are pushing up against it, right? So you could always do more than that. Before we move on to my favorite part, which is the disruptive updates, so we're going to tell you about folks that are pushing back against some of these stories, but just in general, the status quo, capitalism, oligarchs, the good stuff. We'll have a bit of an election update. Yeah. Joe and I are from Ontario. We're facing an election right now, and I saw the polls this morning, and they were effing scary. Let me see. What did I see? Moskrop shared it. David Moskrop shared it, and I wish he hadn't. I mean, I don't like to judge anything on polls, but it's the feels I'm getting all overall. So
it does give you a direct, like the polls aren't telling you exactly what's going to be the turnout at the election. I mean, we've been disappointed by polls before, but it does give you a general sense of where the population might be. Gives you sort of an impression of the direction things are going.
Yeah.
To an extent, go ahead.
Let me just give the seat projection, and then we can talk about whether it's a load of malarkey or not. All right. Just some numbers, some boring old numbers. So, for context, you need 63 to get a majority here in Ontario. Unfortunately, Doug Ford has 83 seats, and he's now projected to have 98 when we're done. 98 people. No. The Liberal Party is second with 12. 98 to 12. And the Ontario NDP, who have been the official opposition for too long now to have this number at 11. The Green Party 2, and of course they have Sarah Jama holding on to her seat in Hamilton Centre. So I'll have one independent sitting there if you believe these polls. But that is, if we had super majorities, that would be one. And for anybody who doesn't understand how politics work, if you have a majority in a provincial parliament, you just get to do whatever you want. Absolutely. In terms of legislative obstacles, there are none. Like, none. We are the only obstacle, people. Okay? So stop looking, no matter what happens, do not look to Bonnie or to Merritt to solve anything at all. Please stop asking for them. Like, you can get a soundbite in the legislature. You can get one of their fucking petitions going, whatever. It won't matter. You literally have to mobilize against power at this point. So, those are the polls, if you're to believe them. But what are folks talking about on the campaign trail? Well, Ford had another hot mic. He had two hot mic moments. We talked about one, death penalty for fentanyl dealers. But also, what was his other? Oh, that he supports Trump, that he was happy Trump won.
That was from much earlier, too. That was around, when Trump won.
This is a lot of accidental hot mics. It's sounding more to me like a second channel through which to distribute dog whistles.
Well, to be fair, it's the only mic we catch them on because they aren't talking. They're not going to debates. They are not answering questions. I have a great clip on my phone there. I was going to turn it into a TikTok. I just need the creative juices flowing. But, it's Doug finishing a press conference where he just talks and he's ready to take questions, and they just cue music, right? They crank up the music and he's like, what? I can't hear you. And it's like, that's our democracy. So on top of there being next to no platforms for anybody, the conservatives, and they've done this many times now, this is a pattern, it just gets worse every election, where they just like stop showing up to the community. To be honest, I'm not even sure Carolyn Mulrooney is going anywhere right now in terms of campaigning. They are hardly even have signs up. They are really relying this time around on low voter turnout, right? Middle of or February, I ran a campaign at this time of year. It's fucking awful. And 3 advanced poll dates, and now many people are reporting that they have not got their voter cards. I have not got my voter card, and I'm definitely registered. Okay, I'm definitely registered, and yeah, so that always sides on with conservatives most of the time, low voter turnout. But yeah, he doesn't even feel like, I think he has to campaign. And look at these numbers. He's right. What is going on?
Well, I think there's a. Right. Go ahead.
Fight amongst yourselves.
Well, no, actually, go, Sean, because I've got something else to add to this. This is something to help.
Well, there's 2 things I'll say about polls. One is that I shared myself a federal Leger poll on my TikTok recently, which shows the Liberals with a majority federally. And Kevin DeVoe, who now, Tammy, if you're still watching, you'll recognize that name. Of course, Kevin DeVoe is a former Nova Scotia NDP MLA. And globe-trotting electoral consultant who goes to, flies to Bali and tells them how to improve the way their parliament works. And he sort of a quote skied at me on Blue Sky with this when I shared it there, and said, I'm old enough to remember, and maybe he's taking a little dig at me for being slightly younger than Kevin. But he said, I'm old enough to remember when Kim Campbell had a big rise in the polls, and he referred to it as or it was referred to in that time as a dead cat bounce, where basically like there's an artificial, where the polls don't necessarily portend the electoral outcome. But conversely, I think there is an effect that we saw here in Nova Scotia recently, where if the polls do portend a really extreme, and all the polls, not just one outlier Leger poll that conflicts most of the other polling, but if all the polls show a massive majority for the incumbent party or whichever party they show a lead for, then it does just, people are like, oh well, it's pointless. There's no point. There's no point trying. There's no point going and voting for my opposition party that isn't that party, because they're going to lose anyway. So what's that's not. No, it's no concern of mine. There's nothing I can do. And you see it in the turnout partially. I mean, I think that electoral turnouts are partially due, again, to the clustering of all the parties around the political center that I've been talking about a lot, that is driven in turn by focus group politics and by discarding non-voters. Once someone's a non-voter, they cease to exist. They vanish in a puff of smoke to the electoral parties. And they find themselves, and it's a feedback loop where they're chasing an ever-narrowing group of people with an ever-narrowing political ideology, mostly more or less centrism, people that don't perceive centrism as a bias. You know what I mean? Like those kinds of folks. And so
no wonder they're still waiting for the vote to change everything, right? Yeah. Centrists are just like, that's it. This is the solution. Yeah, I dare not go beyond this point.
Yeah, so this is the thing. Like, I think that there is an extent to which the polling is producing its own result. The polling is a downward effect on morale in the other campaigns, a downward effect on voter morale, a downward effect on people's faith in the system to actually produce a result. And that lack of faith is well placed. I think we're seeing in a lot of cases. And again, like I don't think anyone would claim, nobody claimed that democracy would work with 45% of the voter electorate participating. Like, it can't work. So it can't be legitimate by its own principles. A majoritarian system with a majority of people opting out cannot be legitimate. Its own claims to legitimacy are undermined by that result.
Joe, what did you got there?
Yeah, I mean, to add to Sean's, I mean, this brings in the idea of possibly, forcing people to the polls by doing the Australian thing and starting to tax people if they don't vote. That's a whole different argument. But in regards to shifting the vote, in regards to shifting the polls, there's been actually some changes going on. One of the first things I've got here, and some people may have seen this, is there's a site called Smart Voting right now in Ontario. This is right now out for strategic voting, and it's quite clear it's to prevent the Conservative win. And based on whatever routing you're in, if you're particularly in a, whoops, I'm not going to go through that one. If you're in a particular voting area, you can start making changes in regards to what your routing is. Oh, they're asking me to sign up now. Oh. Hang on. Oh, there we go.
Is there precedent for people ducking out of this to use the bathroom? I've been pounding coffee all morning. Can I turn my camera off and come back?
Yes, bye.
Okay, thanks.
So, for example, if we go over to, here we go. I want to see here if I can.
For the record, he is the first person who had to leave to go to the bathroom. That I know of.
Fair enough. I didn't.
Usually people are more subtle.
That's true. I usually go before I go there. Okay, so now they're asking me to log in now for the writing, which is kind of.
I'll add that to the guest checklist. Did you go to the washroom?
It's a very, very good point.
I like to make sure they have their water, but the flip side of that.
So what this place will do is it will actually help you out in regards to selecting who your alternatives are, and the idea is based on whatever's in here, it'll be able to help you vote in your writing for the alternative, and it's just again for the popular vote. Now, this really comes down to the goal of: do you want to vote for what you want?
But
depending if what you want is also to get Ford out. So this is where it gets kind of gray for people as to which way they want to go.
Yeah, I used to rail against strategic voting when I was an NDP supporter because I really felt that there was stuff that defined or, distinguished the NDP from the Liberals. But that argument is becoming harder and harder to make, provincially, federally, both. And so, it does. But I don't like the idea of folks spending their resources trying to pick a winner. I would rather folks just go and, yes, I would prefer you work through the election against your Conservative candidate. But let's say all you can do is show up at is show up at the ballot box, is to at least send a message of what you think your values are. But, stopping Ford is also paramount. So I get that the efforts are there. There is an NDP candidate in Eglinton Lawrence. I don't remember her name. I apologize. Mm-hmm. I should have had it in my notes. But she has dropped out of the race, and it explicitly to prevent vote splitting in Eglinton Lawrence. So she has deferred to the Liberals. More in her statement doesn't really make that all that clear, but on her social media pages, she does. I imagine NDP headquarters called her and was not happy about this decision. The Liberals also didn't run anybody in Windsor West, but I don't think that has anything to do with strategy. It serves to mention, people are really excited that someone dropped out to prevent vote splitting. And they're wondering, who else is going to do that? But at that point, if you ever saw the parties embrace it, because they're not embracing this at all, they might as well just merge those two parties together. I think that would be conceding for the NDP to even, or the Liberals to suggest that they do that, from an official perspective, is to concede that there is no real difference between the two. They would have to say that, right? Because what would Merritt say? What are you giving up? What are we taking this stand for? And you have to remember, she is still spending resources on trying to remove Sarah Jama from office. A seat that you could just be okay, that one's good. We got that one. Not we, but the left, the progressive, not Ford, at least, if it's ABC. But no, we've gotten updates that they're actually even paying call centers to call through Hamilton Center because they've destroyed their base there. There is no volunteers to do the calls. And it's not uncommon to pay call centers to make calls. That is normal. But it's the fact that, you can also tell them, look, don't call Hamilton Center, right? If I'm going to pay, I've got 20 people for a couple hours, I am going to focus on the riding that I think I can take from a Conservative. But they're not, right? What the NDP do when they highlight ridings, I don't know how Liberals operate, But they usually look for places they can steal from liberals because it's an easier win. You're not trying to convert conservative voters. You're just trying to convince liberal voters that you're the most robust option for them at the time. And because it doesn't require you to really do anything. I mean, they do go after conservative voters, but just like in general with their garbage messaging. But I mean, when they go, okay, this riding, we're going to give this riding a lot of money and resources from head office, it's usually because they can compete against a liberal. So like they don't play into this at all, right? They want to be able, they ran a candidate in every riding. That is a bragging point that they don't actually get. Only the Greens and the Conservatives are running a candidate in every riding in Ontario. So the Greens, that surprised me. It's not easy to get people from communities to have the time to run for a campaign. Like it's feast or famine. I swear some ridings probably have like 1 million people that want to run and you have to whittle it down. And then others, I mean, you are borrowing from other ridings, you are begging people. They're often just parachuting people in or just, hey, put your name on the ballot. You don't have to campaign. It's just like so we could say we had a name there. But the Greens, they look like they got on every ballot. So, I mean, looks like it's not going to pay off all that much, but that's a sign that they probably did a lot more work in the last 3 years than on the ground than the other parties. And I saw someone post on Facebook trying to recruit people to call for the Ontario NDP. And they were trying to convince people in a political space that phone conversations from a phone bank are what win an election. I promise you, yeah, it's important, but you aren't going to convert a caller and you don't even train anybody to do that. You will not get trained for a call center and be like, okay, you were going to debate this person on the need for more nurses in Ontario. And that's what we need. And that's why they're going to vote for us. You're almost taking a temperature check for the most part. So yeah, the Ontario election is not looking great. I guess like things can still happen. I like to see that campaigns are popping up all over the place. So Not One Seat is one place that you can look to for strategic voting information. Joe, is that the site that you shared? Not One Seat? Or was that
No, that
a
was
different
Smart
org?
Voting. This one was
Smart
Smart Voting
Voting.
dossier. Yeah.
Oh, they just recently followed me on the socials. I'll check out what they're doing. Smart voting. So there's like, yeah, there's organizations doing that, but then there's also very issue specific groups that are launching their own campaigns. Diana Chain McNally, I should have linked it, but I just saw it before we logged on to do the live, has launched a campaign that has a lot of questions around housing and homelessness and trying to get these as campaign items. So, you know, there's a million ways that you can play a role in the campaign without, you know, having to pick a team right now. I mean, when you go to the ballot box, you do have to eventually decide what you're going to do. And there's tools to help you do that. But you know, waiting until that point is kind of will be fruitless, to be honest. But let's see what bears fruit. Yes. Oh, feds. Oh yeah, just a quick note on the federal election, like it whenever that is. But the NDP did send out a memo to their executives, like to their riding executives, so throughout the country, and warned them like you start preparing for a early March election. They call it a snap election. I don't know how they can call it a snap election if we're all fucking waiting for it anyway. Like, but I guess technically we still call it a snap election, and so we don't know if that means Jagmeet is anticipating doing what he said originally, calling a non-confidence vote, or, you know, he couldn't strike a deal with Mark Carney, I think, because the NDP polling federally is so bad right now that I don't think they have much leverage with the Liberals in terms of, you know, hey, don't make me call an election, because, like, you know, the Liberals are gaining steam. They don't lead in most of the polls. That Ledger poll was like an outlier. But, you know, like they are gaining points for the most part, and the NDP are losing points. So,
And right now, with this trade war and everything else coming from Trump, I have the feeling anybody who calls the election is going to suffer. It's much the same way as Trudeau and the Liberals did when they called the election during the pandemic. That actually worked against them. Even though they were looking like they might be able to get the majority, as soon as they were brought to the polls, the people that were supporting them were like, I'm not so crazy about you now because you're dragging me out of the house. So,
especially when it's cold. I mean, March might be a little
exactly.
bit better, but
So anybody calls the election now, it's like we're in the middle of a trade war. We can't.
Well, I think that in terms of like, we're seeing, the Liberals gain votes at the expense of the NDP. And this is the backside of the NDP project of trying to court Liberal voters, like you've talked about. And I understand this strategic motivation behind that is that like you're taking a vote from your nearest competitor as opposed to like just going, talking to the 55% of people in Nova Scotia who didn't vote and saying why, what needs of yours aren't being met and how can we meet them. They just say, well, if I can take one from the Liberals, they're our closest competitor. It's better to take one of theirs than it is to take it's for every 2 votes we pull from the non-voting part of the pie chart. 1 Liberal vote is worth every 2 of those because you're taking something from your competitor. And so like, I think from a fundamental perspective, I understand the strategic impetus there. Additionally, with the phone call stuff, like there is a broader best practice, I guess. And I've talked about best practices in politics and how it's leading to the stultifying state of things as they are now. But there is definitely a sort of a general perception that conversations with voters are what turns elections. And the most, the most focus is still on doorstepping. The most focus is still on going to people's doorsteps and talking to them there. And then that is what's going to win over, not necessarily someone who's already a conservative voter, but somebody who's not tapped in and someone who's no one has come to their door. That's an opportunity there. If no one has talked to this person except for you, if you're the first person at their door, you've got a chance of winning them over because nobody else talked to them and people feel disconnected. But yeah, this is the thing is that hanging, and we've seen it here in Nova Scotia too, like hanging the fortunes of the NDP on the decline of the Liberals, basically on like, we're going to poach Liberal voters. We see the Liberals are weak right now. We're going to try and chase their voters. That works until the Liberals are resurgent. And then all of a sudden, like you're going to lose all that support. And so what, at least in the Leger poll, like again, and with the very suitable caveat about the Leger poll that it's well outside of anything else anyone is reporting and is unlikely to come to fruition. That the result of the election is very unlikely to be what it was forecast by Leger in that poll. But it does track with what I would expect would happen if the Liberals did become ascendant in a federal election in Canada, is that it would come at the expense largely of the NDP. And you'll start to see how the NDP has been losing its base, losing its left-leaning support base over time, over attrition. And Jessa, I know that, and Joe, maybe you too know all kinds of folks who used to be in the party and who aren't anymore. You know what I mean? They've been losing that base by attrition. And gaining a temporary bump of Liberal support, disaffected Liberals who are mad at Trudeau for whatever reason, or they're mad about the carbon tax, or like, they've got one of their issues, and that's been enough to cause them to become a little bit more politically vagrant and maybe consider the NDP. But like once the Liberals look resurgent, once they walk, when they say no more Trudeau, no more carbon tax, well, the 2 issues that the Conservatives have been hammering for the last 8 years are now just gone. Like the NDP lose all those supporters back to the Liberals who are desperate to avert a Conservative win. And then you see this projection of 4 seats for the federal NDP in the Leger poll, which again, take it with a grain of salt. I don't think that'll actually happen, but you know what I mean? Like it does. That is, if that Liberal result were to occur, I would expect that to be the corresponding NDP result.
I had a great conversation with a comrade who was working some of the elections down south in the United States for the Socialist Party. That's not what they're called, though. The People's Liberation. Anyway.
God, which one? There's so many. Like when you pulled up that Joe, when you pulled up that panel of those religious weirdo lawyers, I was like, this looks like the American Conservative Party aged 10 years, or the American Communist Party. That weird, like the Midwest communist guy, like all those weird broheims that started that weird communist party, like MAGA communists.
Okay, well, this I don't know. These aren't MAGA communists, but the point is, in a lot of the places where they were campaigning, they actually were denied being on the ballot, but they continued campaigning because, you could have conversations at the door that maybe you normally wouldn't. But then their tactic isn't so much going to the door and saying, here's all the reasons you should vote for me. It's here's all the things we do year round. And so like by the time you get to the writ being dropped and you're going door to door with your pamphlets, a lot of people have already soaked up what they think your party means based on what they've done for the community for the last few years, right? Like that makes your job so much easier. So when they go door to door, eventually and are on the ballot, they were like, remember when we helped you organize your tenants, right? You know us. We're the group that helps organize tenants, right? When the election's over, we're running the soup kitchens, right? You know us. We're part of the community. What do you need? Let's do it together. And oh, by the way, there's an election and we have somebody on the ballot. But like none of these parties can do that, right? They literally are trying to like go and have these ideological conversations at the door, or trying to sell this like one policy that's going to really win over a voter. And people are just like, I don't know, man, this has happened so many times. It's not the tactic that we think it is anymore, without the organizing to go behind that. So, you know, I kind of poo-poo participating in elections, but if a party were to operate like this, right, like where that win, that getting more votes than your opponent isn't the be all end all, right? It's just one of the opportunities to promote your organization or to promote a better way. And, you know, should you win power, great. But otherwise, you know, that's really not where power lays, right? It's with people and organizing. So I would love to see more parties, and we're seeing people organize this way in Canada, to just provide that alternative. So like, yeah, you want to participate in an election, you want to go door to door, you can even stump for a candidate at that point, because it's a lot easier to get on the ballot here than it is in the United States. So like, that's probably a tactic they can't employ against us just yet. But, you know, to do so under these partisan symbols and constraints is just, I don't know, it's not the same. But I'm going to, again, push through to another topic, just because if we start talking about NDP and elections, you know, like this could just go on for a really long time.
I'm still absolutely convinced everybody, all the former NDP, you guys could probably do a special together.
Oh, we have too. Like I've done a lot. Like I should do another one, because I feel like, oh, I've talked about it too much, but it's probably been a while to like explain to people how it works. And because like, I didn't understand until I got in it how it works or really doesn't work. And I always say it's very freeing when you understand how these systems work, because then you can engage them, but from a place of more understanding, or you can just cut loose and consider yourself free of that nonsense. But either way, you're a lot better off than just going in with this doughy-eyed, like, I'm going to change the world by being the next NDP candidate. And you'll find that it's not what it's going to be.
And what you've talked about, Jessa, is something that I really think that, like, when I see these communist groups spinning up, like, you know, out here we have like Atlantic Regional Communists, we have and of course the Revolutionary Communist Party, which if I understand correctly, is a rebranded Fight Back. When I talk to these folks, I'm like, are you going to run candidates? And like, the reason is that like running a candidate like is a way to get a candidate elected. That's one thing you can do, but it's also a way to get your political views in the forefront, have a reason to go talk to people, have a reason to like, and to try and like, because the thing is like you know, communism, socialism, whatever, has a legitimacy gap in Canada where it's perceived as like, you know, we still have a lot of the post-Cold War stigma. So like getting out there and just positioning it as a legitimate political affiliation, even if you're doomed. I'm like, the Marxist-Leninists should absolutely run candidates. Go get on the stage on the debate with those. Yeah, they totally do. I know somebody who ran in Sydney.
You don't automatically get in the debate though.
I know,
right? Like,
I know for sure. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And we see a lot of that. But like, it's a way to have a reason to go talk to people when they're thinking about politics and they're expecting someone at their door. It's a way to get the message out, even if you know you're electorally doomed. Like, that's not the only reason to do it, and it is a good opportunity to talk to folks.
All right. Agreed. Let's just kind of go through one thing that our last headline before the updates is Gaza and the West Bank. So I'm not going to get into it a whole lot just because the time constraint, and it's actually I don't want us paying too much attention to what Trump is saying about Gaza. I feel like sometimes he throws things out there. It's not much of a shift from what we said the original plan had always been by the Israeli state for Gaza. And so it sensationalizes it in a bit. So let's focus on what actually is happening on the ground. And that is ethnic cleansing is happening in the West Bank right now. So we, again, mostly focus on Gaza because of the genocide, but like this is part and parcel of it. The West Bank, the violence there isn't experienced in the same way. A lot of it is done by the settlers. aided by the Israeli army. But just this week, I mean, there was mass demolitions of residential buildings in the West Bank, displacing tens of thousands of Palestinians from their homes, which is the definition of ethnic cleansing. So, the greater project of the Zionist state is still unrolling, even though you see them leaving parts of the north. So Israeli soldiers have left the corridor in the north that prevented folks from returning. And we're watching incredible images of people returning and starting to rebuild Gaza. But yeah, at the same time, the West Bank is under attack. Southern Lebanon is still under attack, and there's still places where the Israeli army has declared like this is a no-go. Despite the ceasefire, they can't return to their homes or their villages, or they can, and they're facing down with the IDF there instead. So it's a time where folks are encouraging you, if you've been supporting families in Palestine, like now is not the time to stop. It's time to actually maybe increase the amount of support that you can give them, but also not to take your foot off the pedal in terms of pressuring our government to stop the arms trade with Israel, because we are now facilitating, this isn't just settler violence at all, it is facilitated by the IDF, who we supply with weapons. And so Canada is completely complicit in this part of the West Bank. And a shout out to Anna Littman. We lean heavily on her work and her experience. I've had her on the show I don't know how many times now, maybe half a dozen. And she is over in the West Bank right now running a bit of, they act as resistance, not an armed resistance, but observers, and just sometimes their presence helps deter some of the violence that, although not always, and they're becoming more bold by the moment. But you know, it is, Westerners are over there and trying to protect what villages are left, you know, what olive groves are left over in the West Bank. And I've just shared in the chat a blog that Anna does from the West Bank, from her travels, and it just gives you firsthand stories of just exactly how they use bulldozers and as well as weapons to continue to annex land in the West Bank. There's footage online this week of soldiers attacking students and ordering the evacuation of a major refugee camp there. And so, yeah, please keep your eyes there and not on Trump in the Oval Office saying what he's going to do as like it's some sort of crazy idea. It's kind of, it's happening, and it's always been the plan. But yeah, did I share that Substack? Because honestly, some of her writing is beautiful. I encourage folks to go over there. It is free. You can subscribe to Anna, but the content there is free. So I encourage folks to kind of check that out. This is not her first trip to the West Bank. And so it's always funny when I see people in her comments, you know, she's got stuff to say obviously on Palestine. They're like, why don't you go over there? And it's like, you know, she has and she does. And, you know, there's levels of ways that we can help out. I mean, Anna's one example, but, you know, there are other forms of resistance that we've shared and we're going to share. So let's go into our disruptive updates. What do I have? There's, you know, sometimes the disruptive updates are typically good, but sometimes they're, you know, fights still to be had. And I think we've got a bit of a mix of that this week. So I guess we could have shared this next week, but we'll just like drop it now. The economic blackout. There's always kind of online actions or mass actions that start with someone just making a suggestion, and it's gained a lot of traction that folks are to not do anything on February 28th. If you have to buy anything, it's to be from a small business. So, you know, the levels of which we can participate will vary based on, you know, whether you can not go to work that day or, you know, in a position to not get anything. But I think it's interesting the way that some of these things are gaining a little more traction than they would have maybe a few months ago, that folks are starting to look for ways to push back together, send a louder message. I mean, booing the American national anthem at all the events is like just a small example, and you think it does nothing, but when you see that it had an impact and that, oh, everyone here is pissed, or like, let's say we find out on October or March 1st that, it was a significant blip. It did send a message of some sort. It does build some sort of understanding that we are a working class, like that we wield purchasing power, labor withdrawal power, all kinds of different things. So folks, you got to black out. I guess like maybe what day of the week is that? Should we not launch an episode, or that's on a Friday? So like, do we not do our live? I don't know. We might have to do the live a different day. We'll just air a black screen for 2 hours.
Well, that's kind of my feeling about some of these things is that like it just results in those purchases being made on a different day. And it doesn't result in a net change in economic effect, I don't think. So, and my other problem with a lot of this stuff is like, I keep saying to myself, like, launch a boycott I'm not already doing 2025 challenge impossible. Like that, like, I'm just like I'm already like, people are like, boycott these people. I'm like, I've been boycotting them for 15 years.
Where can we get coffee? Tell me. Is it just
right?
Second Cup now? I think so.
Well, I get it from Java Blend in Halifax, which is an independent roaster. But like not everyone has that option, of course. But yeah, okay. I also, and go ahead.
But just this is just a warning that we don't share disruptive updates to shit on them.
No.
We can have opinions about them, but like, as long as people are doing something, no, it won't change like Amazon's like forecast for the quarter. But maybe Bezos looks and is like, shit. Look at that. Like, I don't have any juicy profits for today. Or like, oh my God, did they just organize that on the fucking internet? Like, did they just tick, and like my shares took a dive? Like, whatever. Like, so it's every little bit does count, right? And sometimes some of these actions are just like people's first little toe, right? Yeah. Like their first little act of defiance. Like they've never booed any kids singing before, right? But they didn't care. Fuck that. I'm mad and I'm not going to Florida this year. And like, I've got a bit of a bougie uncle. I hope he's not watching. And, he's like, I'm not going to Maui this year. I got to show solidarity. I'm definitely not going to Maui for Christmas. And so it's like, every little bit counts because then in your mind, you've taken that action and you've said, fuck you. I'm mad at him. I'm going to do something. I'm definitely not going to do nothing. So yes, I agree with like this one day that maybe people buy something, don't buy something, like it doesn't have an impact. But I think it's interesting to watch some of these things gain speed. I mean, like even USA Today is like, what is the economic blackout? What does it mean? Where is it coming from? And it's like, this is strange for them. These aren't just like little contained local actions anymore. Like when these boycotts happen, like, you're seeing McDonald's profits drop. So, but it is overwhelming. Yeah. Like everyone has to enter at their own pace, right? Like some people can buy local everything. I think Bothered Boy was like, I get my eggs here and I can locally source this, that, and the other thing. And like some people are in a food desert. They got to go to Loblaws. Yep. They got to buy American eggs or whatever the hell the option is for them because it's cheaper. So, everyone gets in at their own level. But economic blackout. I'm going to go to the next one. And if you guys think of any, just like, I don't know, put your hand up or just like when I take a breath. But we talk about tenant unions a lot. I have a whole playlist. It's like up to 15 episodes now, I think. But Acorn isn't just in Canada. There's a local branch near you somewhere. Acorn, ACORN, just like the things that fall off the tree. But they organize a lot throughout Europe, Acorn International, and they just held a Europe-wide, they didn't have masking, so I don't normally like promoting these events where they literally flew people there, but the idea was that they gathered tenant union organizers from the entire continent and where they shared what was working for them, what was not, like, and for them to hear about all these campaigns, against Airbnb, or rent control in Glasgow, or, creating better housing condition thresholds in Spain. And I just thought, we're due for one in Canada. And I'm sure that tenant union are talking to one another. And when I talk to them, I'm like, do you know of one? Oh, yes, I know one of Vancouver I can put you in touch with. And so there is a network of them, but not anything official in this way. So I'd like to see us moving to that point where we start to recognize tenant unions in the same way we recognize labor unions, and they behave in the same way of, resource sharing, knowledge sharing. And, because anytime we've had anybody who's lived through a revolution on the show, they say, their knowledge was always built by victories before them and revolutions before them. And so sometimes we can't get where we need to go until we've seen that someone else has done it and been successful in doing it. And, the larger coalitions that we build not only lessen the workload, which seems obvious, but that knowledge sharing is invaluable. I mean, that's what we do for the show. So obviously that's my take on that. But anybody have any tenant union stories, or maybe bad landlords getting the shaft in their neck of the woods? Because there are tenants organizing everywhere. I know in Ottawa, bank block tenants, they've stepped up their tactics.
I haven't monitored a quarter bank block because in Ottawa here, so I don't have any updates, unfortunately, in regards to them.
All right. Well, Sean?
The only thing I know about, at least, and I mentioned it before we started up the stream, is that there is some sort of Council of Canadians thing happening next week, like a sort of a town hall kind of affair. And the general gist of it is how to oppose Pierre Poilievre. And I do see that the one of the three local speakers on the bill is from Acorn, and there is an Acorn chapter active here in Halifax.
Yeah, I love that everyone's kind of going to see not which party we can support, but how can we play an influence on the campaign. Because sometimes even like forcing an issue, we never know what's going to be a campaign trail issue, right? Something just has to either maybe blow up at the right time, or you just generate enough buzz at the right time for the right people, and you can really get, that's 2 elections in a row in Ontario. We're talking about ODSP, and it's not just the promises that go with it, but then the problems around it. So yeah, any work to that end, I think, is still valuable in terms of electoral politics. But tenants, keep organizing. And if you are a tenant involved in a tenant union and you'd like to share how you got that way, reach out to the show. Because I feel like sometimes I'm writing the blurb, we talked to a tenant union, how they started, how did they get where they're going? And I'm like, that sounds like another show that I've done, but none of them are the same. Right, the way that they go at tenants or at landlords is different, and different pressure points they've decided to go after. A lot of the issues they face are the same, but yeah, there's value in sharing all those stories. Moving on, we talked about fentanyl at the beginning of the show. Well, politicians are talking about fentanyl, but from a law and order perspective. But a lot of work is going into trying to save the safe consumption sites that we do have. And if you talk to advocates in harm reduction, they are desperately trying to lobby politicians and talk to each other, both to figure out how they can stop the closures, but then what are they going to do should they close? How are they going to behave as an organization should their work be criminalized? So any support we can show these organizations right now is really going to give them a huge boost. And on February 25th at 12 p.m. in Toronto, but other cities are holding vigils, there's going to be a Save Our Sites vigil. Let me just... where do they normally have this? So these are harm reduction coalitions. Thank you very much for pulling that up. I'm technically inept today. I was so good last week, I thought. But what's the address there? Because I've got a tiny little monitor. Oh, on College Street there, right?
It's
Bay and College
Street. The address here is 777 Bay Street, Toronto.
So whenever something like this happens, like an action, maybe it's in a city you can't go to, or, you just can't get off work or whatever. What you can do when these happen is at the same time or around that time is when they're trying to generate discussion around this. That's when you can email your politicians. That's when you can be calling people or maybe sharing these posts online so that other people can attend them. I know, like, I might be mentioning actions there's no way you can participate in, but just knowing that, like, these community groups are coming together and resisting in different ways. So this will be a vigil because, you know, we've lost almost 50,000 people to fentanyl, or to opioid overdose or drug poisonings. I'm learning my language, right? Like, drug poisoning is a better way to refer to what happens. And, yeah, the idea that Toronto's going to lose 5 sites, Ontario's going to lose 10, doesn't really fit into the narrative of all those folks talking about how they want to save folks from overdoses, does it? And I didn't mention this earlier, and because I didn't put it in my notes, but I read it and I was just like irate. Polyev, in all of his anti-drug nonsense, he's talking about selling fentanyl being like mass murder. And he actually invokes the charter when he's talking about putting people in prison for the rest of their life, because he is going to ensure our charter rights of safety, security, of person. And I was like, oh, are you really? Because can we hold him to that? Can we hold him to that he's going to actually secure those charter rights, safety and security of person? Because that's housing for everyone, by the way, asshole. Like, if that's the hill you're dying on, that like throwing drug dealers in prison for life will somehow make us all safer. You know, you can't just uphold that charter right from one point of view, from one barrier.
Yeah, and he always looks at it from whatever point of view he finds convenient. He's not reading it correctly. No. Ever.
And like, yeah, just a reminder that all of these attacks on safe consumption sites and drug users, it's poor drug users. It's still class warfare, right? Because it's a very specific kind of drug that they typically go after under certain circumstances, and never ever are the wealthy thrown in jail for drug charges. Like, I feel like I can say, like, never ever. So it is just a way of scapegoating poor folks. So yeah, if you can give a shout out to your local harm reduction group. I was talking to people in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and they were talking about not even being able to find supplies that they needed, like just basic supplies. And they didn't know if that kind of had to do with the attitude of the provincial government in terms of the supply chain and whatnot. But it's just a little disconcerting that organizations in unfriendly political climates are also not even being able to find, even if they could raise the funds themselves, they're not able to find the things that they need to make sure folks can use safely. But yeah. One last disruptive update before we get to our activist tip of the week, which I think is a fun one. I think we could all it's really entry point activism. So we'll get to that in 2 seconds. But we've talked to many people blockading weapons manufacturers, and I just want to remind people that that is still happening. And I think it's particularly brave when I see it happen in the United States. So it's a reminder that there are good people south of the border definitely fighting this war machine. They don't all buy into it. 67% of them don't agree with Trump's idea to annex and own Gaza, for whatever that means, or red, white, and Greenland. I didn't see the polls on that, but in general, like, a lot of Americans don't. And people are putting their bodies on the line in front of U.S. bases, and they're being met with arrest, and they're getting roughed up, but that isn't stopping them. So this week it was, I think I'm late a week, but late in January, there folks were disrupting at the Travis Air Force Base because that is where a lot of the infrastructure, weaponry comes from, that goes over to Israel. And now we know that there are actually U.S. mercenaries, or what do we call them? Security
contractors.
PMCs,
Thank
is that
you.
what you mean? Private military contractors?
Thank you. They are
That's
working with Egyptian soldiers in the north of Gaza. So when they said there wouldn't be any boots on the ground, I guess technically they can still say that. But in the same way that we are trying to encourage an arms embargo, there are activists in the United States trying to do the same. So Oakland always has really great turnout at the ports over there in terms of like shipping. But, most people don't go outside of Air Force bases. We know what happens when you push back against the U.S. military. So, I mean, if they can do it, we can surely sit outside the legislature here, right? And face some some hill cops. But does anybody have any actions?
I got a disruptive update I'd like to bring to the forefront, if that's all right.
Yes, please.
Let me see if I can present here. Sometimes this goes badly for me when I try this. Share screen. Is it gonna? It's easiest with two monitors.
If I can do it, you can do it.
Fair.
Of course, sometimes I can't. And I'm just like, Joe, can you please pull this up?
All right. All right, there we are. It just took a second to kick in. So here in Chibuktuk, the treaty that governs our presence on the land is the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, first signed in the 1700s and ratified several times thereafter by the Crown and other signatories. And so that treaty enshrines the right of the Mi'kmaq and other treaty signatories. There's two other nations on there, or two other, like I forget the names of it. The Maliseet and the well, I get the anglicized names and the actual names scrambled in my head, but all of which is to say is that treaty signatory nations in Nova Scotia and Chibuktuk have a treaty right to have what's called a truck house. So a truck house is basically a trading post. And so explicitly in the treaty, they are permitted to have one on the Shubenacadie River or anywhere else they deem necessary. They are allowed to sell whatever goods they want, and there is no limitation on the kind of goods that can be sold at a truck house. And it's an explicit treaty, right? And our treaty is a page long out here. There's really not that much to it. But that is one of the treaty rights that is enshrined. And so we have in Chibuktuk and in Mi'kma'ki, which is the territory we refer to as Nova Scotia, among other things, treaty truck houses where they are selling cannabis, among other things, cannabis, tobacco products, whatever. And these exist in a sort of, as far as the cops are concerned, they exist in a sort of legal gray area where like there's an assertion of constitutional treaty rights that's made in the establishment of these truck houses. They've even been used. They actually put one on the Shubenacadie River to stop the Alton gas development, where they were gonna start like a liquid natural gas facility of some kind in Nova Scotia that was going to flood a bunch of areas with salt water and mess up the environment. And so they put one of these on, like just a sort of a shack almost, on the Shubenacadie River where it was going to happen, because that's an explicit, it says like literally they can have one on the Shubenacadie River. They can do whatever they want or sell whatever they want. And so there are a number of these truck houses now on reserve land throughout Nova Scotia, throughout Mi'kma'ki, where they are selling cannabis and they're selling tobacco because it's an explicit treaty right. And so what we see is the RCMP will roll up and they'll just arbitrarily bust one of them. And in a recent case in the Valley area, they actually literally stole the truck houses. They put them on the back of a trailer and took them. They took the entire structure off the property. And so this organization, which has a little bit of a dated name, it says it's Micmac rights. So we don't really spell that word that way anymore in anglicized Mi'kmaq. We spell it M-I-K-M-A-Q or A-W, depending on the plural or singular. And so this is an organization that is active on this issue of truck houses and active on the recent, I think it's been going on for a while. There was a few that happened last year in Cape Breton. There were some truck houses that were raided by the RCMP or the regional cops or whatever. And so they are planning a march at the base of the bridge. And this is their whole plan about what they're going to, like their demands and how they're going to meet they're going to win their demands. But they are organizing a public protest and information picket on the Angus L. MacDonald Bridge. That's the old bridge in Halifax at noon on March 10th. Meet at the intersection of Wise Road and Nantucket Avenue. And so I'm a consumer of these truck houses. I'll confess, like I don't get my cannabis from the government. I get it from these truck houses, usually one in Cape Breton in particular that I prefer, that I am frequently able to visit because I travel there a lot because I have family there. But so this is something that like it's an explicit treaty right, and it's the treating of our colonial law as being superior to treaty law, basically saying that our domestic law overrides a treaty we've signed with another nation, which is ludicrous. And so that's something I
love how it works that way, but with like NAFTA and stuff, it all overrides domestic laws when we sign trade agreements and treaties with other international actors, right? Recognized states, but you signed it with an indigenous group, and it's like, well, we didn't really mean that forever, not like that. Don't you dare adapt that for the modern world, because some people will be like, well, we never meant for those truck houses to sell this, that, and the other thing. They're supposed to keep it traditional, right? They can't decide if the indigenous person is supposed to be frozen in time as they were taught to them in school, or conforming and living amongst urbanites. Like, they just can't decide which they need from indigenous people. And it's just, yeah, you see it being flexed in sometimes these small, it seems like maybe unimportant ways, but it speaks much louder volumes than just like the necessity for a truck station, or it's just,
yeah. And you'll hear that from like people that, white, like hunters or fishers, like they all think that if the Mi'kmaq want to fish according to their treaty rights, that they should have to be out with the same gear they would have been out with when they signed the treaty. But where we're also signatories to that treaty, they still think they should be out there with their radar and their modern boat. Yeah. It's really, there's certainly a double standard in play there.
Absolutely. Anybody else got any updates before we conclude with our activist tip?
No, I thought I had one or two, but unfortunately I chased them up because I'd like to go fact check them and sources. There were no sources for them, so.
Okay. Well, next time if we can source them out or whatnot, and if folks think of, if anybody listening has actions that they're planning and they want us to share, no matter how small, send them our way. We will share them, because sometimes even the tiniest ones that nobody can attend are examples of what other people can build on in their own locals. So there is nothing too small. Last week we were talking about community fridges, for example. So, but to the activist tip of the week, do I have a little banner for that? I do. Here we go. Bye-bye. So last week it was what to do when you get arrested. And just a warning, this one I need you to be careful while doing as well. But folks, yeah, you can catch our previous lives under the live tab on our YouTube channel there. And if you just want the activist tip, you just go right to the end. That's where we give it. Otherwise, you can listen to the whole thing too. But okay, so the activist tip is postering and homemade glue. Now,
let's go.
Yeah. So quite often there's a lot of organizations. What comes to mind is Migrant Rights is good at doing this. Lead Now is good at doing this. A few other folks where they generate graphics, and sometimes their campaign is as simple as emailing this poster to their mailing list and saying, if you have the resources to print off X amount of posters, do it and put it up. Like there's a day of action coming up. There is some sort of messaging you want to get out. And you don't even need this to come from somebody else. You can create your own posters to like have a message in your community. Like there's no soapbox for you to get up on. Maybe you don't have a podcast set up so that you can't rant about what you think is important to your community, but maybe you can create a poster. Or maybe you could just help another organization. So it requires a little bit of resources in that you need to print some posters. But like it can be black and white on computer paper. Like it doesn't have to be anything fancy. And you can do 4 to a sheet, right? You can put them on poles. That's a perfect size for poles, or 2 to a sheet. And there's a really easy way to make an adhesive so that you can just plaster it on, that you're not like, I've gone out with tape guns before and, all kinds of things, and none of it really stays that well. And sometimes you can't like put a staple gun is not going to cut it because it's metal. This will work on anything, and it is pretty cheap. So you need water and flour. All right, bag of flour. You really just need a cup at a time. But let's say, you guys you're going to go out for a while, but you just use a cup at a time. Bring 4 cups of water just as it's starting to boil. Take it off and stir in a cup of flour. Stir it until there are no clumps. Like you want a very smooth consistency. And, it's just like when you're baking. Sometimes I say a cup when you do it and it's really, really runny. It has to be thick enough to act like a glue, but runny enough that you can paint it on, right? That it's not going to be like globbing, like you're not going to push to spread it. It's still got to be viscous, right? Like it's still gotta go, but it is going to be a glue. And then you put that in a container where you can put a lid on so you don't spill it everywhere, and a wide paintbrush, like the one you would do your wall with. And that is glue. That's kind of like what was that, paper mache, when you used to just like, you just put a little bit of the glue on the surface that you want to apply the poster, like just a little dab so that you could stick the sheet there. And then you paint over it. And it is like, it's on there. People are not getting that off very easily at all. I mean, they can put something on top of it, but that is a really low cost and accessible way for you to start radicalizing your neighbors. And I've seen some great artwork out there. And some of these people, they do not care if you use their poster, right? If you are disseminating the message that they've worked so hard to get out, that's good. And like I said, some organizations will send you and encourage you to do this. And so when you're doing it, if you do it this way, it'll stay longer. But, you know, this is not encouraged by a lot of authorities. So when you're doing this, mask up. If you don't videotape yourself doing this, and if you do, be fully masked and don't put it to your personal site. You don't need to take credit for it. Just let it go up. But if you are out there, make sure you're covered, your face is covered, and don't do it alone because you want somebody kind of watching the area to make sure, you know, not just authorities, but not everybody. There's Karens out there. There's people who won't believe what you're saying ideologically wise. Don't get into confrontations with those people. Move on, finish what you're doing, and just move on quietly. Just like do it as safely as possible. But, you know, we talk about like crazy actions on here sometimes, you know, like people blocking Air Force bases or, you know, getting arrested for sit-ins at Parliament. And, you know, there are so many ways that you can just step into the foray or continue to add value, right, to the resistance. So, yeah, a cup of flour, 4 cups of water, bring that water pretty much to a boil, mix it up nice and good, put it in a container, and just go postering away. I will send you some blueprints of disruption posters to start you, but like in reality, you know, something around the election, right? If you've got a question of your candidate or things you want your community thinking about when they go to the ballot box, poster it up, right? Like you don't need permission. Like you don't have to look to somebody who's already doing it. It can be your own message. And so, yeah, just thought we would share that. Any comments on tips on postering, folks, on where you can get maybe cheap printing done? I mean, it's not Staples. They charge a fortune. But no.
Maybe libraries? I don't know if libraries have like photocopiers that are available. And I will say, like, hearing about Wheat Paste as someone who comes from a punk rock background, who's put up lots of show posters, it just warms my heart to hear Wheat Paste being used. We don't use it that often, but there was one. I grew up in Sydney, and there was a pharmacy somebody Wheat Pasted a show poster to, and it lived as long as that building did. The poster didn't come down; the building got torn down. Like that's how that poster came down. So that stuff is there. I mean, your risk, of course, is it being covered over by something else. So like there's lots of like commercial folks that would use that kind of tactic in Toronto. You'll see like huge, like on like when they board off a construction site, when they like put a bunch of plywood up over it, you'll see like Sony will go down and Wheat Paste, you know, a new release or whatever. There's all kinds of people doing this. I definitely I agree with your OPSEC recommendations of like, don't get caught doing this, don't do it unmasked, don't put it on your personal socials. That's all great advice for sure. But yeah, it's a time-honored technique for getting things to be on a wall and stay there.
And I'd also recommend bringing a rag. You're going to need to clean up for, you're going to, and it's one of those
trying to pretend it wasn't you and you've got like just sticky fingers.
Well, it's not just that. You're going to need a rag for a couple of things. One of them is going to be for sticky fingers to clean up for yourself. Absolutely. Get some wet naps if you got that. But also the surface itself, it's not a bad idea to run a rag across it just to make sure there's any debris or anything else.
Before you start.
Exactly. The more contact the Wheat Paste or anything else has with the solid surface, the better it's going to stick.
That's why my 3M things all come off the wall, isn't it? Because I always miss that first step of cleaning the surface. I'm like, fuck that.
Always clean your
my walls are clean, and then it's just like you're sitting there, funk. You know, it just falls to the ground. I'm just going to Wheat Paste it all up on my wall. You'll come next time. This will all be just slick right down. I'm going to test it out this weekend. So,
the resale value for sure.
Yeah, so for all those who celebrated, happy Valentine's Day. Thank you, Joe, for always showing up to the Rabble Rants and helping me hold down the fort. And Sean, for guest starring on this Friday's Rabble Rants. I hope you'll come back because we didn't really get to dish on the NDP nearly enough. And Joe is just dying for us to put another Inside the NDP edition out. So I'm going to have you on speed dial for that, Sean.
The challenge is once we start, how do we stop?
Right, and I feel like not doing it during an election is like just extra mean. I'm like, fine, see what you folks can do. I'll hold you to account to a certain level, but burning it all from the inside just feels a little better after the election. Be like, I told you so, and here's why. Maybe we'll do that. But until then, anybody else have any parting words before we send folks to enjoy their Friday? Nothing profound?
Have a great weekend, including
long
weekend.
Wait, Joe, did you load up the Macklemore?
I did.
Do you want to we'll sign people off with some Macklemore as we go?
Before we go to the last one? Absolutely.
Yeah, because Macklemore, he not only has us fucked up, he has us fired up. Like, this was just money. I love that man even more. I didn't know after Hinds Hall 1 and Hinds Hall 2 if he could top it, but he did. Here's Macklemore.
Yeah. Stand for something to fall for anything. I'm sick, but it's game time. Hey, the world's on fire. We don't own no water, y'all. It may tire for a couple dollars, y'all. New era usher, but white supremacy is still in charge. Talking colonizing Gaza from the White House lawn. But the people mobbing, and we ain't backing off. Finally see the oligarchy and men that control us all. Tax breaks for the elite, and then they taxing y'all. Killing Palestinian kids, and we getting hit with the cost. Why the fuck you think you can't afford the rent in your building, and you can't afford groceries and debt in your feelings? And you know how the West thinks. It's all about the West Banks. Call a ceasefire, then start annexing the West Bank. How you think Israel gets money for the best tanks? And Netanyahu loves Trump. He's like, yeah, thanks. That's your money, and yes, it's all connected. And they controlling your feed, the information that they censor, blocking hashtags. Can't say free Palestine. This 2 weeks in, think where we'll be around July. But you know us Americans, out of sight, out of mind, and they know it too. That's why they running game on our lives. But they got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. And Elon, we know exactly what that was, bruh. They got us fucked up.
That was Jews Say No to Genocide sitting on the Parliament Hill steps, by the way. We interviewed them about that action, and they're like, oh, there we are.
And Elon, we know exactly what that was, bruh. You can bomb a mosque, but you can't bomb faith. You can kill people, resistance grows in the wake. And while our president sends billions to Israel safes, ethnic cleansing's never gonna make Israelis feel safe. More blood, more weapons, more money, more oppression, more hate, more fear, more walls, and more settlements. The colonizer just spoke to us at the White House. What we said was gonna happen is happening right now. Nah, they marching home. Yeah, that's resilience. Millions celebrating like the world was walking with them. You in the palm of God, no man will ever catch you flinching. They can never burn the olive tree that lives within them. The next 4 years, it's time to ride. Fuck ICE, free Congo, Sudan, and Palestine. If you still haven't said shit about the genocide, know your grandkids one day are gonna ask you why. They got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. And Elon, we know exactly what that was, bruh. They got us fucked up. They got us fucked up. They got us fucked up. And Elon, we talking cobalt on the next one.
That's a threat for a new track, yeah? We talking cobalt on the
stylistic change is really notable in that to me. Like it doesn't like his bars don't sound like the previous two songs. It sounds like KRS-One wrote a DMX song. Like it sounds like you know what I mean? It's like
had a bit of an Outcast feel to it, right?
Oh yeah.
Why don't you think you can't afford, all those things and all your rent and he hits a little harder. He's kind of the anger, right? It's almost like it's clouding his flow, but I'll take it anyway.
That's what reminds me of DMX, because it's less dense than the previous two songs. The flow isn't as fast. It's slower. It's grimier. Even the tone of his voice is more gravelly and more angry. And like I feel like you can kind of see that he's kind of like refining the message. He's really like, it's like just the pace of the words is much slower, easier to digest. The video is really dense, I find, for that. There's a lot more, like there's just fast cuts. And if you don't know what's being depicted, you might not pick up on the messaging. You might not know, that's footage of someone being dragged out of a hole. They got collapsed on them in a cobalt mine in the Congo. That's Fred Hampton or whatever. That's the Black Panther Party. Like they might not get the references,
But I think those clips have been so well cultivated that we do know, because they picked those clips that went viral, that a lot of us saw and watched and understood. And I don't know if folks could hear me because I'm like yelling over top of the music, but that shot of Jews Say No to Genocide sitting on the steps, like that's not in the Capitol, although they did an action there that, had awesome visuals. There's 4 shots of Ottawa within that montage, and activists online, they can spot themselves. They know, if you were there.
I've seen those. I've been to quite a few of the events. I'm quite impressed also with a lot of the Malcolm Moore videos having a fair amount of Ottawa scenes. Like quite a few of them, I'm pretty sure I was in the crowd at some point in there, and I'm sure I've met and talked to quite a few people doing the filming. But I mean there was a couple of shots in there, including even his last song there. Which one was it? Heinz Hall 2. Right as it transitions from to Macklemore, there's you hear the chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. There's a shot of an older gentleman. That's from Ottawa. That older gentleman's from Ottawa. Renowned.
Oh, I didn't know that. There was
him and his brother are renowned. I remember driving the truck.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah. They're renowned at they're always there, the two brothers. Generally, they're always there.
Throughout Ontario.
Possibly throughout Ontario. I've just seen them all over in Ottawa. I remember them even at the Pride Parade when we were driving when I was driving the truck into for the Palestine Parade. For the LGBT for the Pride Parade, and they were there with their like 20-foot pole flags, and they were all around the truck, and they were fantastic. They're always there marching. It was incredible.
Yeah, I'm glad we made time for that video, because I had me fired up this week hearing that, and just basically he's openly calling for revolution. And that's not always an easy space to be in. And it is really condemning of the entire music industry that he's really the only example that we have that we can keep playing. Not the only example, but the only mainstream example of someone shouting from the rooftops to free Palestine, which is like really fucking sad when you think about it. We're not even going to talk about except for the Super Bowl. We did get one guy with a flag, Sudan flag in Gaza, so he gets a shout out. I saw him interviewed, making the choice to face, he was arrested. And Louisiana has some fucked up laws. They could have held him for a lot longer, but groups mobilized and ensured that he did get released without charge, I believe. So for folks who were wondering what happened to that guy once he was hauled away by security, he was arrested but then let go.
For life, but I'm like, that's kind of something is going to happen.
Like there's people giving up a whole lot more at this moment, so that it just seems like a really small sacrifice to make, but it went a long way in terms of visuals to share with folks too, and just feeling like a little bit of resistance anywhere we look is very helpful. But I do have to cut the stream, gotta go pick up the kiddos from school. It's that time of the day and it's Friday, so we got Family Day coming up in Ontario, so if folks can enjoy the long weekend. And we will see you next Friday. Make sure to check out our podcast that drops every Tuesdays, Blueprints of Disruption. Until next time, folks. Ciao for now.
Thanks, everyone.
You